All right, we are live. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I saw some speculation earlier about what the three unknown prophets are, and you'll have to wait a bit to get to that. We welcome back Mary. We're going to kind of continue where we left off last time, but each stream stands on its own. So if you didn't see what we were talking about last time, no worries. There's a link in the video description for the entire series on the pagan origins of Islam. But you don't have to have seen any of the previous episodes to understand what's being said today, because we're not assuming anything. And anything that we covered previously that's necessary to understand today's material, which I don't think will be anything much, will be re-mentioned. I did want to let everyone know that there is a new animation that I added today. It is a free animation, which means you guys have to guess what it is. It is a channel meme. That is all the hints that you will be getting for that. Anything you'd like to say to the audience, Mary? Oh, I'm not hearing you. I don't know what happened. So having some technical difficulties on Mary's end. She was just fine right before we went live, and now her audio seems to be not working. So yay for that.
Hello? I see it here.
Oh, now it's working again.
Okay, maybe it's just because it went to sleep and if I have to keep my phone awake the entire time, it's going to be bad. All right. So, um, yeah, I don't know what this new animation is, and I'm looking forward to it. For our introduction today, sometimes my introduction is related, sometimes it's unrelated. This time is unrelated. It is from Nawal al-Saadawi's Many Faces of Eve, which is about the plight of women, specifically in the context. She thinks that it's like kind of this universal thing, but specifically in the context of especially Egyptian Islam as it's practiced there. And this has a practice here that isn't as common in other places that I'm about to read about. She's a rather silly woman about Christianity, because she just assumes that because Islam is a certain way, well, surely these other religions are just as bad, right? And her big evidence for the oppressiveness of Christianity is chastity belts, which did not exist. They were an invention of the perverted minds of the Victorians that never existed. But she's like, oh, the Christians used to try to control their women too, because they would put them in chastity belts before they went off on the Crusades. No, they did not exist. So while she is rather silly and a little bit stupid when it comes to Western history, she actually lived in Egypt and had a firsthand experience with many of the horrors there. And I'm going to describe the plight of the bride on her bridal night, because the hymen was so important. They would hire these women called the woman was called Adaya, or Adaya rather, Adaya, Daya, Adaya. And she was also the one who performed the female genital mutilation as well. And her other job was to tear the hymens of brides in order to get a copious amount of blood flow. And so she was talking about, and this is, so she's talking about how many a husband rang the bell of my clinic. She was a psychiatrist, but she'd worked in general medicine before. Remember, psychiatrists are medical doctors, not psychologists who aren't. So she'd worked as a regular medical doctor in a clinic for a long time before she became a psychiatrist, right? And I do agree with the chat that, in fact, many Muslim men could do with a chastity belt. So many a husband rang the bell of my little clinic in Giza and walked into my consultation room accompanied by a weeping young girl and angry, nervous tones who explained to me on the first night of marriage no red blood could be discerned after sexual intercourse. Numerous were the nights in which I spent by the side of a young girl in a small country house or mud hut during my years in rural Egypt, treating a hemorrhage that had resulted from the long, dirty fingernail of a dea cutting through the soft tissues during the process of defloration. For in many villages, this ritual ceremony in honor of virginity is performed by an ugly old crone, the dea, who earns her living by amputating the clitoris of children and tearing open the vagina of young brides. The father of the bride then holds up the white towel stained with blood and waves it proudly around his head for the relatives assembled at the door to bear witness to the fact that the honor of his daughter and of the family is intact. I used to attend some of these marriage ceremonies in order to follow at close quarters what was taking place. On one occasion, the dea embedded her long nail in the hymen, but only a few drops of scanty blood were forthcoming. To my horror, she pushed her finger up into the vagina, and the blood welled up in a steady stream. The white towel, bathed in crimson, flapped out over the father's head. The drums beat, and the female voices emitted the long, drawn-out shrieks of joy. I realized that she had cut through the wall of the vagina. At the end of the night, in answer to my questions, she explained to me that on marriage night she was very much in demand. Her fame, built upon her capacity for bringing forth a vigorous flow of blood and the process of defloration, had earned her an unusual popularity and a steady income from such auspicious occasions. When the finger of a rural husband replaces that of the dea, then defloration becomes even more brutal. His only experience in the use of his hands is related to gripping the thick handle of the plow or the harrow. The dea, at least, has some notion of a female body, and nothing can be more brutal than the thick, coarse finger plunging mercilessly into the external opening of the vagina and boring up in an unknown direction. Thus it was that on a cold winter's night, a young girl was carried into my clinic, bleeding profusely between her thighs, only for me to discover that the husband's finger had perforated the interior vaginal wall into the urinary bladder. So this kind of nonsense still does happen. It is quite horrific. And this is if you've heard of the women who get surgeries to restore their hymen or increase their hymen, this is reasonably common, associated with Egypt particularly, because they have this hymen and bleeding obsession, that they think that girls who are virgins ought to like bleed all over the place the first time they have sex, because of their absolute obsession with controlling women in the context of a culture that allows men to do basically whatever they like at any time. So it is taken for granted that women are constantly in danger from being deflowered in some way by men, because the men are basically let loose to sate their urges on anything that they can get a handle on. And yes, it is true that not all women bleed, and no woman bleeds like she's been cut with a knife, for heaven's sakes, during sex the first time, unless something has gone horrifically wrong, right? So it is quite an awful experience, and we need to understand how real these things we read about that happened in ancient times, how relevant they are to the lives of so many people today. So now there is a chat. Someone in the chat says that he feels that he doesn't know Jesus because he doesn't have true repentance, because blasphemous thoughts have taken over. So repenting isn't an emotional thing. It isn't a feeling that you have. It is a decision that you make, not this emotional feeling that can wax or wane or come and go. You can have thoughts that you do not essentially submit to, right? So no, God does not go, hey, I'm not answering your prayers. That does not happen. If you turn to God, he will answer you. It's just like the story of the woman who went and pestered her neighbor for a loaf of bread, or pester a neighbor for justice, or the man who pesters his neighbor for some food because he had guests, and he's like, I'm already in bed, I don't want to get up. Just as that person who didn't really care about his neighbor all that much responded to the persistence. God, who loves us so much more, does respond to us. So to recap kind of what I've been doing, I talked about in the past, I've talked about how the Neolithic, there were Neolithic hunter-gatherer stone sites that morphed later on into masajid. So like, just like we have the same sorts of layouts, the circling, the running back and forth, all the things that you find in the Kaaba, you could find in other pagan places. I've also talked about specifically rock worship, the adoration of rocks of various places, why they did that, and how the black stone is a continuation of that as we're bringing kind of the whole history forward. Then we ran into Alexander the Great, and I showed as an example of the kinds of things that are in the Quran. I showed how Alexander the Great had the best-selling novel of the ancient world written about him, and then that accidentally got incorporated essentially into the Quran in response to a challenge. So, yeah.
So Houston
That's
asks,
horrible, but
why
true.
didn't Daniel Pikachu suggest FGM as a solution for the urges of young girls instead of suggesting child marriage? And that is part of the reason why they do the practice, to supposedly suppress the desires, not just of girls, but of all females, of course, because it's not like it goes away when you become an adult, because apparently women are not supposed to experience pleasure.
Yeah, then that is actually the main reason, is that women are considered filthy, and this will make them cleaner, and also because they think that it'll take away all ability to have sexual pleasure, but then it will also take away any desire that they possibly have to be unfaithful to their husbands or to go out and do anything. So yes, Daniel Hikachu, his entire shtick. So he had a personal tragedy in his life. His family were non-observant Muslims, right? He had a personal tragedy where his sister was murdered in a really horrific way. The guy who did it did not get in the kind of trouble that he should have. And she was out partying with people where there were drugs and things. And so Daniel's turned to Islam as the answer to social ills. And his solution is that, well, if the second she started menstruating, she was married off to a man and imprisoned in his house from then on out, she never would have died. And it's just so intensely messed up. It's so intensely messed up to have that kind of point of view. But that is really where so much of this is coming from in his life, is that he had something horrible happen. He thinks that this is the solution. Well, if that's supposedly the solution, well then if she had had a clitorectomy through female genital mutilation, which is the mildest form of female genital mutilation, always involves the removal of the clitoris, then maybe she wouldn't have gone out and partied then either. I mean, it's awful. It's awful. It's terrible. But that's just the kind of mentality that that he has. Like, this is the solution for what happened. It never would have happened. But in reality, what happens in these countries is the absolute brutalization of children becoming ingrained in society, and the mere suspicion that a woman has, she went outside without your permission, that could be the basis of her death. And killing a family member, if a man kills a family member in these societies, is typically considered a private matter, and she is just quietly buried. It is not prosecuted as a crime. It is, in most cases, it just is not addressed as a crime at all. It's a private matter, and in fact, it is explicit in Islamic law that if a man kills his kids or his wife, that it is not considered something worthy of capital punishment. It is explicitly excluded, when you would think that would be a worse crime to kill your own wife or kill your own child. Now it is worse. So That is reality. And Dr. Whitemeat, yeah, I don't know how old your particular view or your particular the particular documentary that you saw about the Iraqi sex trade was, but the Shia nikah muta is very much a part of Islam. It is not cultural. It is Islamic. It was institutionalized by Muhammad, and the Sunnis are just so embarrassed by it that they pretend that they're the caliphate abolishing it is adequate to actually abolish it, whenever there really is no reason to believe that it was abolished in the lifetime of Muhammad at all. So anyway, let's
All
move
right,
on.
so let's
Yep.
get into the presentation.
Yep. And in fact, I am giving you the three secret prophets up front. It's dhul-qarnyn again, and we're going to talk about who the real dhul-qarnyn is this time, rather than the one in the stories. And Saleh and Hud are our three. Okay. So there are our three prophets, and we're going to discover when they lived, how they lived, and everything that they did at that time. So here is the real Alexander the Great, dhul-qarnyn. So, and I jokingly put hillbilly Greeks here, but it is really kind of important to understand the identity of Macedonians. So they were Greeks, but they lived up in the mountains, and they were considered kind of backwards, and they were considered not cultured like everyone else. They're just kind of these semi-barbaric. Sure, they speak a language that is a dialect of Greece, but they're none of the what famous Macedonian was there ever? What scholar? What philosopher? What mathematician was there ever in Macedon? There weren't any. These people are just hillbillies, all right? So Philip II was kind of had a chip on his shoulder. He had something to prove. He wanted people to know that Macedonia was an important place, and he was an important person, and he was going to make a true kingdom and an empire out of what he had. And he'd already expanded his land quite a bit. Now, Alexander the Great was actually born to his fourth wife, but she was at that time his chief wife. And this is another way in which he was considered a bumpkin, a hillbilly, a kind of crazy, backwards person, because he practiced polygamy, and the rest of the Greeks kind of looked down on that, right?
So well, there you go. You already have more evidence that he was an Islamic prophet coming right up there at the start.
Good job. Yes, he's a true, because he lives in the mountains. Muhammad, the Hijaz, were the backwards mountains. They were considered very backwards, and they practiced polygamy. There we go. So now we have, we are in about 350s BC at this point, all right? So this is 348 BC right here is this picture, and this is really about kind of what Philip II had done. This is his world. So Olympias was a princess of Epirus, and so they were buddies. They were allies with each other, kind of against everybody else. So you see how they're starting to expand here quite a bit. So in the sources, early sources, there are lots of dreams and visions about how great he'd be, and these are in the histories, because history at this time was obviously, it was not necessarily as factual it is now. He was considered kind of a demigod as it was, and so they considered these dreams and portents to like prefigure how great he was going to be, right? And so
another way that he's like Muhammad, considered a demigod by his own people.
Oh, it gets better. It gets better. They talk about the pleasant odors coming from him, which was a divine trait, just like Muhammad. There you go. So he is a true prophet of Islam. He demonstrates so many of the characteristics. So,
so before you go any further, Numidian asks, what about the mysterious prophet Zul-Kifl?
That is not a subject of today.
You'll have to stay tuned for another week for that one.
Stop that. Got it. My thing is acting up.
Dwight says,
So
who doesn't enjoy pleasant odors? I mean, come on.
yeah.
Who wouldn't want their prophet to admit pleasant odors when they go to the bathroom?
Yes, exactly. So we're talking about the real history of Alexander the Great, and it's really interesting. It's really interesting because of all the things that you find in it's hagiographic, right? And so much of it is actually, you kind of go, ooh, I recognize this in the stories of Muhammad's youth, all right? So he very famously tamed his favorite horse, Bucephalus, when nobody else could tame him, and he named a city after him. He was tutored by Aristotle very famously, and he began conducting campaigns just at 16. He was very young. He successfully put down a revolt while his dad was out of the country. So he took charge and put down the revolt. At that point, he named his first city after himself. And because he was successful, his dad gave him an army of his own to lead because he's super good. So we find that there was kind of the succession crisis going on because Philip fell in love with this chick named Cleopatra Eurydice, and she was the daughter of a general. So she was a Macedonian proper, and she was also his immediate favorite. So Alexander was afraid that if there was this full Macedonian heir and his dad liked wife number 5, 6, whatever, better than the rest, right? That he might get cut out of the inheritance, right? So Alexander had a spat with his new stepmom's father. He fled. Then there was kind of this mediation between them. He came back. His older half brother was in negotiations to marry this Persian satrap's bride. So that's like a Persian governor. And then Alexander got paranoid about that. He was afraid he was going to be disinherited again. But Philip said, oh, I said, no, you aren't. And then he exiled some of Alexander's friends for saying, yeah, I think you're right. I think you might be disinherited. Anyway, while he was attending the wedding of Alexander's only full sister, to Olympias's brother. Yes, that would be her uncle. Philip was assassinated by the bodyguard, who was himself immediately killed. Suspicion lies with Alexander. We don't know whether or not he was really behind it, but it seems kind of suspicious that suddenly he's getting all paranoid that he's going to be bumped from being inherited, and now his dad got killed. So Alexander came to the throne. He had some of his own relatives killed and got rid of them by blaming them for the assassination. Olympias had her rival and her rival's infant daughter burned alive, which made Alexander angry because they weren't actually a threat because she only had daughters, right? But Olympias was not one to be crossed, and so she had them burned alive. His half brother was mentally disabled, and some people blame Olympias, said she must have poisoned him, but he was spared because he was very obviously incapable of being any kind of rival. Yeah, Alexander is not a friendly guy.
Got a question for you. Did any of the classic tafsir say who dhul-qarnyn was? Islamic websites seem to say it's unknown, or it was Cyrus, but what did scholars say?
So all of the early ones agree quite firmly. I discussed this last time that it was in fact Alexander the Great. Once you get beyond like 200 years after Muhammad, suddenly they're like, oh, we can't really be sure. But some of the more honest modern ones are like, yeah, it's definitely Alexander. But Alexander wasn't the way they say he was. He was like he was in the novels. So the novel edition of Alexander is the true one.
Funny how the perfectly clear Quran creates this debate over who a figure described in it actually is. Of course, there wasn't that much debate early on, as you pointed out, but there shouldn't be any ever because the Quran explains itself in detail.
So anyway, since his half brother was disabled, his half brother was no threat to him, so he was spared in the general slaughter of the rest of the people related to Philip. As soon as he inherited, he had rebels to put down, of course, and then he started expanding his empire kind of local to him, and then he set out on his Asian campaigns. He took Anatolia, that's the thumb up there, that's Asia Minor. Is my thumb going the correct direction for you guys? I think it may be backwards. It is going the correct direction. Okay, good. All right, so that's kind of the thumb that's sticking out there, Turkey, right? That's Anatolia, and there he sliced the Gordian knot. And one thing that he did, so he made this big point to go to all these different places and get himself declared legitimate or recognized as legitimate by the religious authorities in that area. So there had been this prophecy that the next ruler of this whole great of a great empire would be able to undo this incredible knot that was tangled around this cart. I don't know why there were ropes on a cart, but like the end of the cart had this huge knot on it, right? And the famous story is that Alexander the Great started pulling at it, was irritated. He was like, well, they don't say how to undo it. And he sliced it open with a sword and he cut it in half. And he proved that he was, that since he had the intelligence to cut through the nonsense, essentially, it kind of showed that he was the one who had the true authority to do these cool things. And so this was one of a number of religious places that validated him. So he made a special trip to that city to slice that knot so that he would fulfill prophecy, right? Then he rolled through the Levant, he rolled through Syria. The Jews actually welcomed him because they were kind of annoyed at the Persian rule at that point, and so they thought that he would be better as kind of this distant figure that let them go ahead and rule themselves, essentially. There is a legend considering Simon the Just talking to him. Actually, there are a bunch of legends about Simon the Just talking to him, but the dates are wrong. Simon the Just was like 100 years later, but because he was the most famous of the high priests, kind of anywhere near that period, he gets transported into Alexander's age and all of these false stories, but they're legends. He gets to Egypt, and he was greeted there again as the liberator, right? And he took a special trip once again all the way out to Siwa, which is not an important place. It's way out there. It's called Ammon here on the map, and that's where or Ammon. That's where he was declared Zeus Ammon. That was declared officially to be his father. His father is Zeus Ammon. Everybody, hey, come and pay attention. Look at me. This is my dad, etc., etc. Because he was making these extra special trips to any place that was important and to be recognized as the true ruler, if it existed and had heard about it, he would have taken a trip to Mecca. He didn't go to Mecca because nobody had heard about it because it didn't exist, right? One thing that's especially interesting, why does Ammon have two horns in Siwa? Well, we find out. In Carthage and North Africa, Baal-Hamon was especially associated with the ram and was worshipped also as Baal-Qarnayn, or Qarnaym, Lord of the Two Horns, and an open-air sanctuary at Jebel dhul-qarnyn, the two-horned hill across the bay from Carthage in Tunisia. So, guess what? We're back to Baal again. It is amazing the number of Baal references that we find in Islamic history. So we have this dude who has the horns associated with Baal, who is now in the Quran for all time. excellent, very excellent. So Siwa was like at the edge of Egypt, and because of contact with the Phoenicians, Ammon acquired the horns of Baal, and then Zeus acquired them from Ammon. So now we have Baal, Zeus, Ammon all together, mixed up, mooshed together. And guess who his kid is? His kid is Alexander the Great. So I hope you guys enjoyed that bit.
So,
yeah.
Got a couple comments from the audience. Houston says the Greek version of the Solomon split the baby story. And I do think there's some similarity there in how a thing was solved cleverly. Numidinian says golden knot is the Rubik's Cube of antiquity. Very good. And a super chat from Solitary Emmy.
Wasting your time on social media is one of the best deeds a Muslim can do. There's a huge need for it. You know this and I know this. So that makes the reward even greater. So give generously and Allah Azza wa Jal will give you even more.
Thank you for wasting your time on social media again. Super sticker saying bravo. Thank you very much for that. And an off-topic question from Kanisendio Al-Islam. Could you make a presentation about what is happening in Nagorno-Karabakh? I wanted to do something, but I don't know about it. And that's addressed to you, Mary. And I also don't know anything about
it. That's the Azeris are attacking the Armenians again constantly because, of course, what are Muslims going to do except for attack their Christian neighbors, right? So, yep.
And real quick here from Clyte, that was edited, I take it, is amusing. Yeah, he says a few words in between, wasting your time on social media and is the best deed a Muslim can do. But, you know, I cut out those words in between.
All right. So after that, after he took his extra detour to go and make sure he went to the holiest place that he knew about, right? Alexander the Great took over Assyria, took over Babylon, ancient Assyrian Babylon. This is obviously part of the Persian Empire, the territories of Assyrian Babylon, right? And then he went, he's kind of going after the Persian emperor at this point, right? And his victories in Persia included him going through the original true Caspian gates, which are just a pass, because Darius III is like running away with his retinue because he keeps getting beaten. So he keeps trying to find a place where he can have a stand and win. So he's trying to gather his troops and find a good place to have a pitched battle where he'd be able to win against Alexander. And he went through this pass, and Alexander followed him after. And just going through that pass apparently started all of these crazy ideas of the Caspian Gates being in the Caucasus Mountains instead of where they actually were, and that became the legend eventually. Anyway, he eventually managed to capture everybody, right? Yes, I like Abdul Qarnayn.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like it too.
That is a good one. So he captured everybody, and he's like, well, there isn't really anyone nearby to capture, so let's go where there's some good cities over into India. And he was campaigning there until soldiers are like, we have enough. You're just not going to be happy until each of us die. You're going to campaign for the rest of your life. Doesn't matter if there's only, 0.1% casualties per encounter. Eventually, we're going to die, and we're here not to die, but we want to enjoy this huge empire that we got. Well, Alexander the Great made it back to Babylon, and there's suspicion that he might have been poisoned, but it seems more likely in the balance that it was his fever that was actual sickness, because a lot of the reports say that he had a fever, but it was so suspicious that they just kind of a lot of people are like, yeah, it seems really convenient that he's dying at this point. So,
and there's no autopsy back then,
right.
So never know.
Yep. So on his deathbed, they ask him, "Who do you leave your empire to?" And he answered, "To the strongest." So this is how big his empire got. And it's really funny because some people say, "Oh, well, it's figurative." It really is about Alexander the Great. And he really built a gate somewhere that are keeping out Gog and Magog. They're just like across a cave, and Gog and Magog are these people who live underground. And he went to the far west, and he actually saw the sun setting into the Atlantic Ocean. My question is, how far west did he go from where he lived, from where he was born? And the answer is not very. He did not go very far west from where he was born in terms of, I mean, I don't even think he went to the actual coast of his own empire on the west, much less made it all the way across to Spain. Like people will imagine that, oh, well, he must have gone to Spain and look. No, this is he went east, and he didn't go all the way east either. So anyway, this is his campaign route, all the places he went to, and did not see the sun even apparently setting into the far the Atlantic Ocean, because he never got near it. So,
But it's not hard to imagine why people, exaggerated the tale over time. He had a vast empire, one of the greatest empires the world has known, and all conquered within a dozen years or so.
Oh, way
So
less. Yeah.
not hard to see why the legend grew over time, and people imagined that he conquered the entire world basically, and thus they said that he went all the way to the end of the world, and the proof of that is that he saw the sun setting there.
Yeah, it was less than 10 years, right? So he could not have seen a sun setting in Amadipur, even figuratively speaking. He did not go there. This is all made up. It's all pretend. It's just that he was such an incredible general that people imagine all of this about him. So, whoops, I keep hitting the wrong button. And remember that originally there was no Gog and Magog in the story. It was like they thought that he built something to keep out the Scythians. It wasn't any legendary peoples. And they did say that the Gog and Magog were the Scythians, but they were like regular people. They didn't become these legendary figures that were huge and scary and everything else until Islam. Like even in the novels and the poems and stuff, they were peoples. So yeah, he took all of Persia. He took and he had his own empire too, and went beyond, took areas of India that had never been captured before by anybody from outside of that area. So anyway, his personality, one of the reasons he was secure on his throne is because if he feared that you were going to betray him, he would just kill you. So he killed Philotas, the son of his great general, on the suspicion of treachery. And then he assassinated his general before he even knew about his son, because he knew he might react poorly to his son being executed. And that general had once saved his life, yet he would kill his great general on the suspicion, because he felt like everybody but him essentially was replaceable. He had an incredibly violent temper. He drank all the time, and he fought all the time, and he killed his friend who was also a general, Cletus the Black, while he was furious and drunk, and Cletus the Black had saved his life. Actually, Parmenion might not have saved his life. I think he saved a battle with some of his moves, but not necessarily Alexander's life. Cletus the Black absolutely saved his life. He claimed to be half divine. He kind of pushed out the propaganda himself that his real dad was God, and not that God had slept with his mother, and so he was half Zeus. He was happy for people to repeat that, and he pushed that out. He was, however, sexually restrained, and here we go. He is not at all like Muhammad in this way, because he was considered to be quite sexually restrained. He married Roxana, who was a Sogdian noblewoman, out of love. He married 2 Persian princesses, and Sogdia is like way the heck out east. Okay, he married two Persian princesses from 2 different kings, for political reasons. He might have had a mistress named Basine or Basine. Didn't look that up. He had a son, Alexander the Fourth, with Roxana, and Roxana miscarried again later, but his son was still a really little kid, like a toddler when he died, so he had no chance. He had a best friend, Hephaestion, from childhood, and Hephaestion died natural causes, or rather, he wasn't killed. He died, but he kind of lost his kind of lost a clear sight of where he was doing, what he was doing, where he was going, after his friend died, and started doing more megalomaniac stuff. He had already asked for the Greeks to bow down onto the ground for him, which Greeks did not do. Greeks would only bow to gods that way. But in Persia, it was Persian practiced, right? And he wanted these Persian things and this Persian makeup and this Persian this and this Persian that and the Persian kinds of honor that you didn't have in Greek society. One ancient report claimed that he was, in fact, extremely fond of boys. This report was repeated by several sources. The relationship with his friend, it may have been sexual, especially when they were younger. We're not entirely sure. He definitely actually loved Roxana and married her for love and no other reason, right? But he may have also liked boys. Generally, he seemed to really like drinking and fighting more than anything else. And being drunk constantly doesn't really play into men being super sexually active at the same time that they are completely and utterly smashed with drink. But some people do their best. He seemed not to be as interested in that as in drinking. In general, yeah, he'd rather fight and drink more than anything else, but he may have had homosexual relationships, which I don't think the Quran would approve of very much. What do you think?
No, probably not. Although it's not nearly as negative as the later Muslim sources are. The Quran is only modestly against homosexuality compared to the people who came after Muhammad, who ingrained it as a death penalty and whatnot.
Yep. And so Nabatea, after so he dies, his successors, and that's what they're called. They're called successors in Greek. His successors all go to war with each other, and they all try to grab different areas. And these different colored areas are areas, if it's got a color, it was grabbed by someone who was one of his generals. If it doesn't have a color, it kind of broke off and was kind of independent-y. And then we also have down here the Nabateans. They managed to get independence whenever the empire broke apart. Like, nobody cared about them because they weren't important enough. They would soon get very, very rich, but they had not really, the massive incense trade had not really kicked off, and so they weren't all that wealthy. So everybody wasn't going, I need to control this place, I need to take control of it. So they weren't really high on the list at this time. They also hadn't really solidified their places. We are the end of the frankincense trail, all the caravans come to us. This was just about to happen, but they managed to set this kind of set themselves up in this way, in this place where they were able to do that, take charge, especially since Nabatea is our first true Arabic-speaking polity that anyone cares about. They actually spoke actual Arabic, not ancient North Arabian related language of an oasis, but actual Arabic they spoke, but they had all of their official writings done in Aramaic instead. So
we have an observation here from Houston Euler that Alexander didn't even bother conquering Arabia. How insulting. And he wasn't unique in that. None of the ancient empires really cared about Arabia because, well, it's mostly empty space. You have to basically go through all this worthless land to get to the southern
Yemen.
portion, that's Yemen now, to get anything of any value, so it wasn't worth the effort.
Exactly. And Petra itself had not existed at the point that the Nabateans kind of found their empire. They built Petra around this just now taking off incense trade in that following century that came after. So they kicked off then and got great by controlling that. And by the way, given our recent Cleopatra drama, I decided to show some pictures of Cleopatra that were either made from her appearance in her life as her coins were, or were made during or near her lifetime in Pompeii. This is what Cleopatra probably looked like. So I don't know why they decided to put a black woman and make her be a Greek and very, very inbred. She did not have a family tree so much as a family pole, because they adopted the practice in the Ptolemies, because remember, there are all these different groups. There's the Seleucids and the Ptolemies and the Antigonids are the three that are important. And the Ptolemies decided very quickly that they liked the ancient Egyptian practice of incest. So most of her ancestors were brother and sister. And there's some, well, maybe she was from a concubine or mistress. Yeah, there's no real evidence of that. She probably actually married her full brother. So, but she got rid of him in a civil war and enlisted Caesar in order to get rid of her brother. Then married Antony very famously, and then she died, and eventually the Romans took that over. But this is...
Before we go any further, Breakfast Gun says, I guess he, meaning Alexander, never did the Hajj. Yeah, I guess not.
No, but he would have if it were an important place, because he deliberately went out of his way to try to go to get religious justification and to get the religious folks to approve of him wherever he went. And actually, he was so respectful of the Jews and their religion that they have generally, even though they're like, he's a pagan, they still have a pretty positive view of him overall. So here are the successors by 240 BC. This is nearly a century later, about 80 years later, right? And so you can see that the Seleucids rather, really had taken over almost the entire area of ancient Persia, and the Ptolemies. I think this is actually in mostly, I don't know why it's got what native language of the person who's writing this is, and why some of the terms are odd when this is English over here, but whatever. Anyway, the Ptolemies over here and the Seleucids are really the two groups that we really care about. The other ones are kind of small groups that didn't really have much power. They had lost out. And you see that Jerusalem is right there at the intersection between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So that meant that they became a center of conflict, right? So, and indeed, Tone, I am saying that Cleopatra was not at all a woman of color. She was Greek, and she was very inbred Greek. Very, very inbred Greek. And in case you're wondering what happened to his wife and his baby, Alexander's, they were disappeared by some of the generals, and they kind of accused each other of killing them. But it probably wasn't Ptolemy. Ptolemy probably was legit and would have protected them. So, at this time, this is finally when this frankincense trail kicks off, except every single map is wrong. That's the irritating thing. Even the ones that don't put Mecca on the trail, they're wrong too, because there is this place called Qaryat Kahal, and that is where I kind of have this extremely ugly big red dot over here. And so that is this oasis city that allowed people from around the Persian Gulf to get closer in, and allowed people from other areas to trade at this it wasn't really it wasn't an oasis in the sense that it had natural springs and things like that, but it did have tons and tons of wells that were dug and water irrigation projects to funnel what little water there was so that they could have some gardens and things like that, even though they weren't very big. And so that was kind of the hub in the south. And then they would go all the way up to Medina. Now, there were smaller trails. So there was that little trail through from Najran, or Nagran, as it was said back then. It had the G hadn't turned to a J yet, right? Up through Taif, which is near where Mecca would be, to Yathrib, which is future Medina, right? But that would be a really minor route. Really, everybody wanted to go to the city out in the desert that was founded by this group called the Minians in the 300s BC. And the Minians were they were kind of new kids on the block. They used to be underneath Sheba or Saba, right? And they kind of got their independence and they founded the city, and they really took control of a lot of this trade route. And while Saba itself, Sheba, the Sabaeans, they were really strong in Yemen proper, these guys took a lot of power by controlling the trade up toward the Greek world, essentially. So it's really interesting because you can go, and all the old caravan routes, they're still highways now. It's quite fascinating, like, because people kept using the roads, and so then they just paved them. So now there's a highway there where these caravans used to go. It's really kind of wild to think about, but this lets you know kind of the amount of time it would take to go from different places. And you see how wildly the Najran to Yathrib trip was. Well, that difference had to do with the different routes, really, that previously they had always wanted to go through the Qaryat Dhat Kahal city that later was abandoned. So obviously there's nothing. Medina, the future side of Mecca, is marked here. There's nothing there. There's no reason to be there. It's not only the poor mountains, because mountains are almost always poor, but it's also that there's really no trade routes nearby either. So here is a map around 300 BC. It's a little bit wonky because I don't know why they keep putting Saba so far north, but Ma'an or the Minians, they were further south. And Saba was more in Yemen proper, and Ma'an was in this area called Asir. You see Asir here in the pink. So if you see that little pink thing in there, that's where Asir is. And that's where the Minians were kind of based out of. They weren't that far north, but nobody really knows about them. So nobody draws them on maps, and it's really, really hard to find. So in the north, we have the Nabatea, right? But we also have these slightly more south of Nabatea are these cities centered around Dedan. It's called Dedan in the Bible. It's called Al-Ula now in Arabic, and also Hegra, ancient Hegra, which is called Al-Hijr, is the other place, and it's marked Mada'in Saleh here on this map. So around this were these folks from the Lyhian tribe who were based out of Dedan and created kind of this northern empire that went all the way into Medina. It's shown that they controlled Jeddah here. Jeddah doesn't even exist at the time period we're talking about now. It may exist in the 1st century BC. So it is spelled, so you couldn't find the pink area, the little purple, the tiny, if you look up in the tiny inset picture, the purpley pinky color up here next to the empty quarter, Rub al-Khali. So that is your pink corner. So anyway, these guys are farther to the north. If you see between the Nabateans and Ma'an on this map, that's kind of where they are, except they managed to control Medina, future Medina, of course, Yathrib now. Everything's got 2 names. Sorry about that, guys. I'm doing my best to tell all the names, but Medina, Yathrib would be controlled as well by them for a lot of the part of the time. Now let's talk about why there was no one in Mecca. So if you can see, this map of rainfall, current rainfall, wasn't really much better then. I have kind of blocked out the one on the US map so that we have the same measurements. So you can see how the red area with the very least amount of rain anywhere in America is at the same rainfall level as Mecca itself. So the driest parts of America are in this general amount that's in Mecca, about 4.3 inches of rain. Las Vegas gets 4.2. That is how little rain there is out there. And it's kind of at the edge of this hyper arid area here and closer in. And if you're at the foot of the mountains where it collects all the water when the rain comes down, you could have like a little oasis area where all of these, all the water running out of the mountains and the streams kind of collect and then dead end. And you can have gardens. But in the mountains themselves, they're super dry and you can't grow hardly anything at all. It's just scrub land. And so even if you're a herder and you have your animals and stuff, it's very poor. So yes, there is no historical evidence of important caravan routes through Mecca because there's no sense in going through Mecca. Imagine you're on a road, you're traveling, let's say we're traveling near Mecca, right? On the flat part of the ground. You're going north. To your left, there are high mountains. What sane person on earth would go, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to climb to the top of these mountains, and then I'm going to climb back down them again for no purpose whatsoever. None. There's nothing. There's scrubland up there. There is no purpose to going up there. It is not ever on a caravan route, any caravan route. There would eventually be a minor road between Taif on one side and Jeddah on the other, and you have to get between them somehow, and that was the road through the mountains, and Mecca was on it. So you need to have both Jeddah and Taif existing before anyone has any reason at all to travel through there enough. Oh dear.
I think it's probably just...
It's just me. All right, good. I hope so, because... Oh wait, I'm fine now. All right, so
yeah, YouTube didn't give me any warnings.
Oh,
I think it was just you.
It was just me. Well, I guess they decided that the weather was bad in my house again. So at this time, the main route was land-based, but we're still in the range of like 200 BC at this point, right? There was some ocean route at this time, but most of it was land route. The reason was that the people in Sheba and the people in the Minions, the Ma'an or Ma'in, depending on who's deciding what the letters were. We're not even sure, but they are they kind of stop all ships from coming through and make them unload and load them onto their own private ships and take them across themselves, and they don't let other people go through there. And that, because they have a monopoly, they're driving up the prices of shipping and it's really expensive. So a huge amount of the trade really is by land, but it's not even going close to Mecca, where Mecca will be eventually at this time. Except for very minor traffic that's local, essentially, right? So anyway, this is kind of an image of what the landscape outside of, on the left, you have Mecca, or not Mecca, on the left, you have Las Vegas, and on the right you have Mecca. And I want to show Las Vegas because it isn't as overgrazed, so you get somewhat of a iffy view of like how much it can be produced there if you just look at what it has now, because of course they have lots of overgrazing. They had overgrazing then too, right? This is nothing new. Overgrazing is very common there, but you can at least think about how much was produced. But still, this is not much. This is about the same amount of rain. There just is not much in the way of living things. And notice that here on the left, we're kind of, on both of these, we're kind of below the mountains. We're not like way up in the mountains right now. And Mecca itself is in the mountains where things run off really fast. You get even less growing there, right? So, so now we've reached 200 BC. And at this point, the Seleucid Empire has broken up into kind of independent Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, which are really cool, by the way. And you have the Iranians are up here doing their thing next to Armenia, so they're independent, and Armenia is independent. Galatia has shown up, so you know the Celts, how they invaded, formed Galatia, and the Galatians are descendants of those Celts, right? They've migrated into the area. You have Pontus and Cappadocia, which are Hellenistic, but they're ruled by Persians. Bithynia is Hellenistic, and it was Hellenistic under Greeks, but was eventually conquered by Pontus, which again is a Persian extract ruling folks. And Armenians and our Lyhianites are still where they've been. So they are still controlling this area and this trade, which has suddenly become extremely profitable. So they are getting rich by controlling that land, or at least relatively rich compared to what anyone in that area used to be. So Antiochus the Great was the first Seleucid to be able to take over Jerusalem. And you see the kind of the light color was what it was whenever he kind of came to the throne, and then he did wars of expansion, recovered a lot of land, and expanded into new areas. However, his expansion into Anatolia made all the Greek city-states go, help, help, Rome, help, brand new power, please help us. And so Rome helped, as Rome knows how to help, by driving them out and then kind of taking it over themselves, right? So that's
well, I mean, what do you expect? I mean, you ask a powerful army to come into your land. I mean, do you really think they're just going to be like, oh yes, we will liberate you and then let you live independently? No, that's not how it's going to work.
I mean, they had not yet reduced them to the level of just provinces, but you know that's coming. That's what Rome always does. As soon as you ask Rome for help, you're on the path to Provincetown. It happens every time. So
I was chuckling because of this comment here from Morak. Yes, there's generally a lot of vegetation near sewer pits.
So
that's just wrong.
So we have the Parthian Empire show up. They are native Persian related people. They're, I'm using Persian very loosely. I'm not using it about that particular small group, but they are going to be kind of the ones to eat away at the eastern edge of the Seleucid Empire until they kind of have to throw in the towel as Rome pushes from the other side. So remember, our Seleucids here, they've got Jerusalem, and guess who's not going to be happy about it? The Jews. The Jews are not at all happy about it because they were not nearly as nice as the Ptolemies were in letting them do their thing. And so you had the Maccabean Revolt, which is very famous. It's in the books of the Maccabees, etc., etc. There were there was an anti-Hellenization faction, and so they were with Ptolemies because Ptolemies mostly left them alone. And then there was a pro-Hellenization faction, which were with the Seleucids. because the Seleucids wanted to impose their culture more on them. And so there were conflicts back and forth. So during Antiochus IV, that's the famous time whenever they invaded the temple and stole the stuff inside, and Seleucus stood there and was like astonished that there was no idol inside the temple, because all other temples had an idol. So over time, there were these dynastic wars back and forth. They're trying to, some people are now appealing to Rome, because of course Ptolemy is not as strong as it used to be. The Ptolemaic kingdom is not as strong as it used to be. So they're appealing to Rome and to the Seleucids and back and forth. And eventually, during these dynastic wars within the Seleucid Empire, and with the conflict involving Rome supporting this side or that side within Judah proper, the Seleucia Seleucia is now this tiny little state, and just kind of really falls apart heavily and gets taken over heavily by the Parthian Empire. And now we have a Judah, which is now has its own king again. However, it's really essentially being ruled at the pleasure of Rome. So you're totally independent, but we're also kind of Roman clients, that sort of thing happening again. So the Romans had now helped the Greeks some more by reducing them all to provinces, as Rome does. So in the intervening 100 years, Rome being Rome, right? So during this time period, or the time period following, Lyhian actually ends up falling to the Nabateans. So we're going to talk about this Lyhianite kingdom. SLH was written on all the inscriptions at the title of the pagan chief priests. The word means messenger. Thought you guys would be interested in that. So you might think that it has to do with peace, but that is a different sibilant sound. This one is rooted in the term for messenger, and in all the other Semitic languages, except for Arabic, they all have messenger-related words with this. So now the messenger or apostle of their chief god is their chief priest. You might recognize this as being Saleh's name, and you would be correct. This is the same name as Saleh had. It is, again, not related to anything about peace in any form. It is this pagan chief priest title, right?
So what you're saying is that a pagan chief priest, just a generic title, right? Coincidentally or not, is the name of an Islamic prophet in the Quran.
Yes, and it gets better, because Saleh is supposed to be from this city that's called Madain Saleh, because it's named after him by Arabs who recognize it as Al-Hijr or Hegra, which in fact it is, right? And so it's Saleh's city, right? And Dedan were the two main cities, and Dedan was the original seat from which they expanded. Nabatea began slowly taking its territory, and I misspelled that. They conquered Hegra in 65 BC permanently, because things went back and forth for a while, right? And they took Tama in 32 BC. They conquered Dedan finally in 24 BC, which kind of ended the kingdom for that period. And Nabatea the king seems to have made his relative the governor at that point. This seems to spell the end of the Minian colony, which had been established in there as well. There are no more inscriptions about him in about Minian kings in Dedan any longer. And that was really confusing to me for a long time, because certain articles and certain scholars thought that Dedan was being controlled by the Minions because of the inscriptions, but it seems like they had a colony there, a trading colony of representatives and stuff within the city, because the Minions controlled most of the trade route and they did not actually control the city itself. Really confused me. I'm like, when did they take over? When did they take over? Well, apparently they didn't ever take over. So in the meantime, so we'll come back to the city, but in the meantime, Hegra, yes, it's supposed to be Hegra. In the meantime, we have the Hasmonean Kingdom of Israel, and this is the greatest extent was under Salome Alexandra and 67 BC. The Seleucid Syria finally falls to Rome in 63 BC, and then Egypt falls with Antony and Cleopatra dying dramatically and all of that stuff in 30 BC. Then there is this campaign of the new Roman governor of Egypt, right? There's a Roman governor of Egypt now, and he takes a campaign down into, yeah, that is the Hasmonean Kingdom. Sorry, guys. Thank you for putting in the shapes. That's really helpful. So the Ptolemaic Kingdom is now under control of the Romans. And so the governor wants this frankincense trade, which is super wealthy. They had already tried to take over Nabatea, and it just had not gone well for the Romans. So now they're like, well, maybe we can grab the other end of the trade. And so for some brilliant reason, they think that some Nabateans are going to help them out on their campaign when the Nabateans darn well know that they want to destroy them. And so they get kind of led by the nose a bit, but they do get all the way to the south. Now, there is a story of this in Strabo. And guess what? There is no story of in Strabo as they are marching down the Hejaz. There's no mention of what city? Guess.
Mecca?
Indeed. No mention of Mecca. They talk about the Minions and they talk about the Sabaeans, the Sheba, right? No mention of Mecca. In fact, they talk about how incredibly empty it was and how deserted and how desolate it was, how terrible it was. Anyway, this governor, and it also mentions Najran right before they get to Yemen proper, essentially, right? So Egypt is not a vassal of Rome. Egypt is reduced completely to being a province. There is no Ptolemaic kingdom at this point whatsoever. It's gone. It's now Roman Egypt from here forward for a long time, okay? So for like the next, what is it, nearly 700 years? So, goodness. So they have initial military success, but they don't have any reinforcements. They eventually fail and they kind of give up. So, yeah, there is no big city. It doesn't exist. No Borg city. There's nothing there. So, so they go, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We can't conquer this. It's just not practical. Well, let's bulk up the existing ports in Egypt and build them out and stuff so that we can get ships in with all of this really valuable frankincense and myrrh. And let's take control of the islands in the Red Sea and destroy any pirates that happen to be there. And we will navigate our own ships through there, and we won't let the Sabaeans or the Minions or anyone else monopolize that Red Sea trade anymore, which is what they did. And they're much better sailors than any of the South Arabians were, or any of the Arabs weren't sailors at all at this point. They had like tied together little bitty boats is all that the Arabs had as fishing boats. So they very successfully take over, and almost all the trade is now going by sea. The only stuff that's going locally now are the stuff that Arabs are trading essentially with one another from these various places, because the Arabs, remember, they've got the camels, they're the truckers, they are the backwoods truckers of their age, right? Except some of them are hillbilly truckers if they're out in the mountains, right? And they because they are truckers and they are a land-based people, they continue trading via land. But if an Arab is not doing the trading, it's just not going through there anymore. So now you have, by the time the 1st century AD rolls around, you hit that wall, boom, like the trade falls off massively. But there is still enough there that people care about controlling, right? And somewhere around this time, by now, Jeddah finally exists. It exists as a fishing village. It has no anchorage. It's not a trading location. You can choose to go from Jeddah across to Ethiopia if you want to, but it doesn't take regular trade. It really is serviced mainly by the land routes, and it gives people fish. So
let's stop for a second here and take a super chat from Jack Ray.
If you want your wealth to increase in this dunya, then give sadaqah more and more. Every single day, 2 angels come down. One of them is making dua for those who give. He says, Ya Allah, give those who give.
So 2 angels are going to come down every day. For some reason, Allah can't just know that you gave. The angels have to come down and check whether or not you're giving on that day, and then they'll report back to Allah. So make sure that you are giving, not to me, of course, to our desperately needing Muslim ministries every day.
So this was kind of the political situation in this area at the time when Jesus had his ministry. You guys should be reasonably familiar with this map. The Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, which is Edom, were under the power of a Roman governor who would be Pontius Pilate whenever Jesus was killed. And Galilee was still at this time under one of the sons of Herod. The Tetrarchy of Philip was the kind of the big boss in town, under whom the governor was the lower boss, right? So the next important source we have is called the Pleripus of the Erythraean Sea, which literally means the Red Sea, but really Red Sea referred to like the Indian Ocean too. They called it the Arabian Gulf, and then the Red Sea.
Your audio cut out, Mary. Mary, stop. She's still going. She's going and going and going. She doesn't know that her audio has cut out, and she can't hear me either. she'll figure it out eventually. Oh goodness. She's still going. She hasn't figured it out yet. Well, she's trying to figure that out. I guess I'll read some audience comments here. Gray says, the angels are coming down. Dive. Excellent work there. Moss says 4 haters spotted. Of course, that would be the 4 dislikes on this video, but that's okay. The Muslims can come in and dislike the video all they like, as long as they're watching. I have no problem with that. And neither does YouTube. It doesn't penalize you for dislikes. So it's really rather pointless of them to do. Snoopy says they didn't have Star Trek back then, which is just one of the miracles of Islam. They had the Borg even before they had Star Trek. Obviously, this is why you should convert to Islam. Alicia says, the snake of Islam crawling out to seek new clothes. Indeed. Let's see. I don't know what was in honor of embryology expert Keith Moore, but apparently something was. So that's good to know. Ben says, Hagar and the well is by the way to Egypt, Kadesh Barnea near the wilderness, not way down in Mecca, Arabia.
It is. I cannot even get into I cannot get in on my phone at all whatsoever. It says the site can't be reached. So
Interesting.
let me. All right.
Yeah, your phone your phone
No,
audio
it's
just stopped
dead. Like
entirely.
reload, site cannot be reached. No internet. It's completely dead. I don't know what happened. Very odd. I'll plug in and hopefully I'll be able to at least get you off. Here, can you talk now?
Can you hear me or no?
Yeah, but you're on my main speaker. Let me see if I can at least get you on my headset.
Sure. No worries, no worries.
Oh, it is
Jeffrey says,
literally clicking everything. All right, how about now?
yep,
Nope.
the audio is good now.
How about now?
Yeah.
I want you to talk.
Yeah, I guess you can't hear me because I am talking.
No, I can hear you. The issue is that your audio source is unfortunately currently stuck on my speaker, which is not ideal.
I see.
All right. Well, I'm just going to be at the bottom of a well. That's just going to be the way it is. You guys ought to be able to hear fine now.
Yeah, they can definitely hear you. I mean, it's not the greatest audio, but it's clear.
It's just not going to be perfect. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just going to have that
so
slight, reverb.
my phone is
room
not
sound.
connecting to theology.chat at all. So this is. Oh wait, here we go.
Weird.
Join with microphone. It's back on again. Start. Can you bring up my thing?
Oh wait, hold on, I did not. Go ahead, try talking. Yeah, your phone audio didn't actually connect. No, I should continue. Is that good? I'm glad. Yep.
With your server, like entirely lost it. Let me plug my phone back in so it doesn't die, because that would be all right. So now we should be back to high quality again. All right, so the Erythraean Sea is another name for the Red Sea. Well, it literally means Red Sea, but it actually means the Indian Ocean, because we can't use consistent terminology across countries or across centuries, because that would make things really easy to understand if we always called things the same thing. So now we need to have different names at different times. Adnan, quiet and listen. So don't spam. This is the actual description of where things are and how people live there. Okay. Now to the left of Bernice, and that is this. It's in southern Egypt. So Bernice is in southern Egypt. To the left of Bernice, sailing for 2 or 3 days from Mussel Harbor eastward across the adjacent Gulf. So that is, we're going to the Tihama area of Arabia now, right? There is another harbor and a fortified place, which is called White Village, from which there is a road to Petra, which is subject to Malakas, king of the Nabateans. So this is way north in Petra, Nabatea, et cetera. It holds a position of a market town for the small vessels there from Arabia, and so a centurion is stationed there as a collector of 1/4 of the merchandise imported, with an armed force as a garrison. Directly below this place is the adjoining country of Arabia, in its length bordering a great distance on the Erythraean Sea. Again, this is the Red Sea. Different tribes inhabit the country, differing in their speech, some partially, some altogether. The land next to the sea is similarly dotted here and there with the caves of fish eaters, but the country inland is peopled by rascally men speaking 2 languages, who live in villages and nomadic camps, by whom those sailing off the middle course are plundered, and those surviving shipwrecks are taken as slaves. So they are they are too. So they too are continually taken prisoner by the chiefs and kings of Arabia, and they are called the Qarnates, or I'm not sure what specific tribe that they're referring to here, or what specific group, but Qarnates is what they say, or Qarnates. Navigation is dangerous along this whole coast of Arabia, which is without harbors, with bag anchorages, foul and inaccessible because of the breakers and rocks, and terrible in every way. Therefore, we hold our course down the middle of the Gulf and pass on as fast as possible by the country of Arabia until we come to the burnt island directly below which there are regions of peaceful people, nomadic pastures of cattle, sheep, and camels. Beyond these places, at a bay at the foot of the left side of the Gulf, there's a place by the shore called Musa, a market town established by law. That one is, now we're in Yemen, distant altogether from Bernice, and for those sailing southward, about 12,000 stadia. And the whole place is crowded with Arab ship owners and seafaring men, and is busy with the affairs of commerce, for they carry on a trade with the far side coast and with Bari Gaza, sending their own ships there. 3 days inland from this port, there's a city called Saura, in the midst of the region called Mafaritis, and there's a vassal chief named Kolebus who lives in that city, etc. So the market town of Musa is without a harbor, but has good roadstead and anchorage because of the sandy bottom where the anchors hold safely. The merchandise consists of purple cloths, both fine and coarse, clothing in the Arabian style with sleeves, plain, ordinary, embroidered or interwoven with gold, saffron, sweet rush, muslins, cloaks, blankets, not many, some plain and others made in the local fashion, sashes of different colors, fragrant ointments, and moderate quantity, wine and wheat, not much. For the country produces grain in moderate amount and a great deal of wine. And to the king and chief are given horses and sumpter mules, vessels of gold and polished silver, finely woven clothing, and copper vessels. They're exported from that same place things produced in the country, selected myrrh and Gebonite minion stacte, alabaster, and all the things already mentioned from the Avalites and the far side coast. The voyage to this place is made about the month of September, and that is Thoth, but there's nothing to prevent it even earlier. So this is where's the fabulous wealth? No, it's just they have myrrh and frankincense, right? And that's what is most important. And things are exported in there for local consumption, and they're exported out there heavily. He mentions the myrrh, but it's heavily the frankincense that isn't available anywhere else. So this is the kind of place that this was. Again, there's nothing to think that there's anybody of any note whatsoever in the interior here. It's empty. It's nothing, right? So by AD 100, right, Jerusalem is sacked, and the Jews were deported under Titus. So that was the destruction of the temple, 70 AD, right? Nabatea is now irrelevant because of the new increased widened ports in Roman Egypt and knowledgeable Roman sailors. Because they kind of did the end around on them, they managed to weaken them so much that they were able to conquer it in AD 106. So after this, no more Nabatea, they're gone. Himyar becomes the new power in Yemen. Before this, I've talked about Saba, I've talked about the Minions, but now the new power is Himyar, who's going to eventually overtake everybody else. It just takes them a while. The Hellenistic kingdoms are now just these kind of small, pathetic states, while Parthia is the rising Persian kingdom. So really the Hellenistic power, the age of Hellenistic power is really over at this point, right? Then there are these extended number of Roman Parthian wars between 54 BC to 217 AD, which, you know, it's hard on empires to constantly be going against each other, but they were fairly regularly during that time. But the very greatest extent of the Roman Empire ever was found in 117 AD. And this is how huge it got, because this was a time when it was pushing the Parthian Empire back really far. So at this time, Judea, of course, was reduced after it was after the temple was destroyed, it was reduced to the state of a province. You'd never have a king in it again after this point, ever, because obviously the modern state of Israel doesn't have a king, right? So this is how incredibly huge Rome managed to be across very difficult terrain. Now, at this point, the Minions are still around, and there's something extremely interesting at this in this article about them. It talks about how the Minion kingdom is mentioned in later sources, so it has to be around in some way, even though they had previously believed it was destroyed by now. And they have a text from the 1st to 3rd century where they still have a king, and Ptolemy's geography will call them a great people in AD 150. And then we also have a reference to Allah. So this is Allah, the king of Ma'in, not Il, which would be the name, or Ilah, right? No Ilah, no Il of the Sabaeans, no Ilah, al-Ilah, but Allah is what is written here. So, Adnan, you are not contributing to the subject matter at hand, so you can sit and be quiet and listen, or you can just be constantly put in timeout because you have to be on topic right now, guys. So, after this, the actual seat of Lihyan is free and it's able to rise again. Dayton, that's its actual seat, but now it just operates as a city-state. It's not operating as a kingdom. The legionary escorts in 10 miles before Dayton. So this is like the frontier right here, right before Dayton. Lihyan was attacked unsuccessfully by Muhammad during the invasion of Banu Lahyan. The name had changed by then, like how it was pronounced, but he did not attack Dayton proper. He didn't attack the actual city. He didn't try. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So we had mentioned before that SLH is the root for is Saleh's name, and also the name of the high pagan priest. So Allah, someone's asking me if Allah was a name. So they talk about Allah, not al-Ilah, but Allah of Ma'in. So they're talking about the Allah of Ma'in. Now, it is kind of a title. It's mentioned. I will go into it at later times. There's this formula that says the 3 daughters of blank. And in that blank, they usually put a generic term for God. So the 3 daughters of Il in the pagan areas of Saba, right? The 3 daughters of El in pagan Syria. The 3 daughters of Allah for the pagans and the original Arabia, Araba, that area, the area of Araba, that was the Hara Desert of Jordan and Syria, that original heartland of the Arab people, right? So they used it specifically not for just any god, but for a particular title name of this god of who has the 3 daughters. But now it's being transported and used as a title name for the titular god of the Minion people. So Allah of Ma'in, right? That's what's being used. So just like Baal, if we talk about Baal, everybody knows who you're talking about, but the word Baal just means Lord. Well, Allah, everybody knows who you're talking about in this context, that you're referring to Wad, the Minion's god, who's assigned the 3 daughters that the high gods are always assigned in all these different places, but it happens to be Wad, this high god, in this context. So
that's what they call Dawa.
Yeah, well, we'll go into more detail about Allah and who he is and how he develops as a figure in this pagan context over time. So, Anyway, so remember we talked about Saleh being the name of the pagan high priest of the Lichianites, and he was assigned to the city al-Hijr in the Quran and the Islamic sources. Now, here's the interesting things. Most of the rock-cut tombs that the Quran thinks are houses were actually created under Roman rule. So this is after AD 106. Gradually, there's desertification in the area, but there are marauders and all the Arabs like coming in and trying to steal and kill and stuff like that. But most importantly, the incense road travel just wasn't as profitable as it used to be, because people are trading a lot less incense over time, because Christians just used a lot less incense than the pagans did. And also, everything was moved out into the Red Sea. Like a huge amount of the traffic was now in the Red Sea, and so there just wasn't any money in this area anymore. So it was just abandoned in the 3rd century. There was no great earthquake. There was no great anything. It was just gradually abandoned. People left it. Now, the Quran states that these things are like houses, right? And all the sources talk about how they had lived in these houses in the rock, and that Saleh comes and calls them to monotheism, and they refuse, and a huge earthquake comes and it kills them. Yeah, nothing particularly dramatic happened. So the Quran says that al-Hijr is a prophet city. All the Tafsir agree that this is Saleh. In fact, this is called the city of Saleh to this day. The Quran claims that Saleh warned that they'd be killed like the Ad tribe already had been. And then he got a miraculous camel of Allah to prove his prophethood at the prompting of the pagans. Then the people got mad and hamstrung the camel, and then they were all killed in an earthquake, and Saleh was the only one to survive, and the city has been uninhabited ever since. Yeah, like none of this happened. Saleh is the name of pagan priests, and it was gradually abandoned. Nothing dramatic. And it also happened, when did it happen? 3rd century AD, so in the 200s AD. And yet Muhammad and all the Islamic material claims that this is happening in super ancient times. The Thamud are gone. Well, guess what? The Thamud, who are supposed to be Saleh's tribe, right? They're still on the map of Ptolemy in 150 AD. So they're showing up on maps when they're supposed to have been long destroyed. But
in the chat we have Mo Saleh who says, "OMG, I'm named after a pagan high priest."
Yes, you are. Congratulations. You are named after pagan high priest of the god of the unseen. According to al-Jalad's theory, is that it actually means unseen. The earlier interpretation was like god of the thicket or god of the groves, but I think that al-Jalad's theory is probably correct. So either Muhammad made this up from whole cloth, or he was altering an existing legend, probably the second. The camel story is in a whole bunch of different places. So again, they're called the people of Thamud. The first time Thamud appears in historical sources is AD 150 in Ptolemy. So they don't even appear before then. They're a recent group who were around fairly recently during Muhammad's day, right? So Muhammad seems to think that the 2nd century tribe, Thamud, actually built al-Hijr and lived there. But what really happened is that al-Hijr collapsed, and then Thamud was around them sometime after that. And then they died out sometime before Muhammad, and they got associated with this place they were never associated with and never lived there. Muhammad has no idea that the Lichianites were the folks who actually built this place. So it's really funny because the historians officially divide the Arabs into 3 groups. The Ba'ida are supposed to be the super ancient ones, right? The first generations. And that's supposed to include Thamud, right? It's supposed to include them. They're supposed to be super, super ancient, more ancient, because the second generation or the second group is supposed to be Ishmael is supposed to marry into that second group there. The Araba is supposed to include the people that Ishmael marry into. But like, this is what, 2,000 years later, nearly, that they actually lived. So he's off by more than 2,000 years because he thinks it's way more ancient than Ishmael. He has no idea when look how clearly late classical these buildings are. Anyone with eyeballs and any sense of history know roughly what time these were built. But
that's
apparently not Muhammad.
That's a very funny statement of you, because I bet you 99% of the people watching would have no clue. But you're like, everyone knows this. So
well, think about it this way. Would anyone think that this particular style goes back before the time of the pyramids? Because that's what Muhammad was saying. So incredibly ancient.
Gotcha.
But these late classical styles, and he's like, yeah, they're super, super duper ancient. So,
Morak asked, is Thamud the camel people who killed the she-camel?
Yes. So they were talking about the she-camel people who they give Saleh the name of, like, the prophet, or the high priest, the high pagan priests of Dedan and Hegra, or Al-Hijr if you prefer. So yeah, this is them. And they're like in the wrong millennium. But he's off by 4,000 years from probably when he thinks it is.
What's a
details, right?
When you're a prophet.
Yeah.
I mean, how did he know they existed? Only a true prophet would know about things that he could observe with his eyes existing. I mean, come on.
So, yeah, the mountain carvings were not, in fact, made by Thamud. They were not made by Thamud at all. They were made during the Roman era when it was under control, and the people making it were probably the descendants of the Lihinites. They were probably Lihian, and the folks who were running around in the mountain or in the valleys and the surroundings. Those guys are the Thamud folks. They were not the builders. They were more the kind of nomadic folks in the area. So there is no Leh who is a moon god of anyone, just so you know. So Allah is.
I said.
Yeah. So
I said the same thing. That's just a myth. So this is a myth that was propagated by a certain group of people. I would strongly encourage people to use real arguments against Islam, not just believe any nonsense that you heard someone say at some time, because there is no evidence that Allah is particularly connected to the moon. There certainly is no
hang on one second. So it says in that inscription, Allah of Ma'in. The high god of Ma'in is Wad. Wad's main, so they are Yemeni, okay? All the different Yemeni groups said that our God, whatever his name was, our high god is the god of the moon. That was like the identity for the god of the moon. So Wad is not al-Makkah. He's not al-Makkah. He's not all these other gods. But each of these gods say that, yes, we are the god of the moon. Wad is the god of the moon. He's also the god of snakes, which al-Makkah was not, right? He had no snake association. So he is a god of moon. He's a god of snakes. And that is his identity. If he is a high god, he is the god of the moon within their system. And he is also called Allah in this inscription. So he is
thank you for the clarification.
Moon god through Wad, because the high god in the place of in the pantheon of the high god is the place of the moon god. So this is what every high god gets associated with.
Right. So just to be clear, when you're living in a desert, the sun is not your friend, right? So often the high god is going to be a sun god, but uh, so often the high god is going to be a sun god in most pantheons. But when you're living in the desert, the sun is not your friend. So then you end up getting the moon. And apparently his source was Lloyd. I'm sorry, but Lloyd is mistaken. There is no god law in any system.
Or
He
leh.
is mistaken about, or leh. Either way, there is no such god. Just because someone said something doesn't mean it's true. So please, actually do some research.
Yeah, that's why I gave you like the clip of that article that says, "Hey, here is an inscription on a stick that talks about Allah of Ma'in." And if it were Al-Ilah, there'd be an extra L there, but there isn't. Okay, so Oxum is, a lot of people call it Ethiopia. I'm going to try to call it Abyssinia, because Ethiopia is just a whole region of that like southern African area. And so while Abyssinia or the Habesha people are a smaller subgroup within that, I'm going to try to be precise, but I might get tangled up in it. So I think that something's really important to keep in mind is that you have to be using sources that are actually from the people you are talking about or are representing what those people think. You can't go to things that are written 500,000, 1,500 years later, where this is the first time some idea pops up and associates something with somebody else. Just because someone at some point decides to associate someone with something does not mean that in that time that was associated with it. Okay? So I can go to Persia and I can find stuff from the 1500s in Persia that says that Allah, the people in Mecca, it was a moon god there, and it's associated with the moon. But that is not actually evidence because it's 1,500 years later and they're not citing anyone else before. And while, yeah, you see the moon, I see the moon, we all see the moon, and we're like, there's got to be a moon god in here somewhere. You have to find that link. The only link that exists is that character Wad, who is called the Allah of Ma'in as well as being Wad. Okay, that is the only connection that does exist. Any of these other characters, these god characters, might not have even existed, or there's no actual connection between them. Okay, so Allah is believed to be a contraction of al-Ilah that was used originally specifically in context to the three daughters of Allah, of whom Alat was one, and Manat and Al-Uzza, right? I will go into that later, okay, with details later, but the pagan systems of this time is not my main focus. I know everybody was like, oh my goodness, there's an Allah here, and I was too. It was very exciting, but let's look at these actual historical sources, right? So, Oxum, or the Oxumite Kingdom, is the name of the Abyssinian kingdom. Okay, Himyar. So, within Ethiopia, the area that Abyssinia would control, Oxum was apparently, they believe, one of many different little kingdoms, and it managed to unite all of these people who were Semitic, had originally, like some of their ancestors had originally come from Yemen. They spoke their language from Yemen. They had culture from Yemen and everything, but they were mixed now, obviously, right? And so they were this mixed group here who had a kingdom previously and then had apparently fragmented, and now they'd rejoined, created a big, powerful kingdom again, okay? And while Himyar was fighting with all of the small kingdoms near it in Yemen, Oxum, which had united in Ethiopia and was now this Abyssinian stronghold power, went across the Red Sea and managed to establish a foothold in that area. So they had towns and fortifications and people living there. And during the reign of one particular king of Himyar, his name is Yasserum Yuhanqyim, which I'm terrible at, right? Anyway, this pagan king was there. There was a major battle between him and two Oxumite people who had the name kings in his inscriptions, and he eventually plundered their 5 forts. He took the Abyssinians prisoner, and around this time, Najran was actually a vassal of Aksum, and it had a governor who was from Aksum at that time too, and it helped fight against Saba before it was defeated. And then after that, Aksum kind of had to withdraw from the area. There's a possibility they did retain control of all the little islands, and there is a possibility that they might have had some of the folks on the in this Tihama, which is this kind of the stretch between the mountains and the coast toward the south. This is the entire length of it, but toward the south, they may have still retained some level of power and control and presence. Okay. Now, Christianity arrived in Aksum and Yemen in the 300s to some extent. There may have been Christians there before, but the first big event in Christian history in Abyssinia was when the king converted to Christianity, and the writings in Ethiopia that were produced much later suggest that his mother had actually been a Christian herself, and that he was also tutored by a slave teacher. He was a Syrian Christian named Frumentius, who had been captured and brought down to teach him and stuff. But the first coins that we have Christian symbols rather than the pagan moon and star symbol. Instead of the pagan moon, crescent moon and star, crescent moon again, all right? Instead of that, he's the first one to have crosses. And that was produced under his reign, not under his mother's, because she was in charge for a while he was a child. So not during her regency, but during his time. So we can't say for sure that she was a Christian. Maybe she just did not feel like she had enough power to kind of convert the official religion of the state to that. So Cush then attacked him. So if you know about the history of Egypt, to the south of Egypt, there was the kingdom of Cush that had pyramids too, and it had rulers too. And for a while, the Cushites or Nubians, right, they ruled Egypt for a very short while and then were pushed back again. And that is where the Ethiopian eunuch is from. We know that because he was the eunuch of Candace, and Candace was the title of a ruling a queen. So a queen regent in Nubia, not in Abyssinia. So there's a lot of confusion about that. So he was from Nubia, and so he went back there. There were already a whole bunch of Jews there because they'd run away from the Assyrians in 700 BC and had never left. And so he went back there. There was already a Christian community there. There may have already been Christians in Ethiopia as well. It's quite evident from the pattern of Christianization that there were a lot of Jews in Abyssinia at the time, because certain Jewish customs were adopted that the Syrians did not have. The Syrians did not have these Jewish customs. And so if he had just been taught by Syrian priests, they wouldn't, for example, have refused to eat swine. But whenever it became a Christian country, they rejected eating swine as well. Okay, so this was a huge event. They were the second country to make Christianity their official religion. The first was Armenia, and this was only like about 30 years later that this occurred. Super important. Now, oops. Oh, I did go to the next screen. I just didn't notice. All right. So during this time, there were some controversies over Arianism. Arianism was rising again. That was the teaching that there was a time when the sun was not. So the sun was not created in the way that the universe was created, but then he was begotten in a way that was before everything else, but there was some sort of proto-time in which there was not a sun. And so this had been already shot down, and the Nicene in the First Council of Nicaea. However, a lot of the emperors actually favored what the bishops had said. No, you can't say that. The bishops favored it. One of the emperors who tried to support it was Constantius II, and he sent this special delegation under a dude named Theophilus the Indian. Okay, India back then, for some reason, Byzantium decided, or at this time, Rome stopped calling Yemen Arabia Felix, which was a fine name. It wasn't an appropriate name, but at least it was unique to Arabia. Felix, that's Felix, you know where it is. Arabia Petraea, Arabia Deserta, Arabia Felix, you know where everything is. They're like, no, that's not confusing. Let's call them Indians now. So from now on, India can either be in actual India or it can be Yemen, because I don't know why they suddenly forgot their geography, but they decided to forget their geography. So Theophilus the Indian was actually Theophilus the South Arabian, because that's wonderfully confusing, right? So they sent him back to near where he was near. Yeah, that's where they created the Book of Nicaea. That's hilarious. So he sent him here trying to spread Arianism, basically, and got him to found 3 churches and major trade cities within Yemen. And he also claimed, very interestingly, that there were already some sort of hyper-Aryan Christians somewhere in the region. I suspect that this is where we will find the original identity of a Nasara cult in Najran at this time, was probably there. It's also claimed that he baptized the king of Himyar in 360, but that Christianity didn't stick around with the royal house, so I don't even know whether or not that's true, or whether or not this particular chronicler is just making stuff up. The emperor had wanted to replace the Orthodox bishop in Abyssinia with Theophilus instead, but Izana basically just kind of ignored him, and the request went away because he just didn't answer it, because he didn't want to have a heretic. So after the time of Izana, the Christian communities in Yemen would come under Oxumite influence directly. So those in Yemen proper are quite clearly, they were brought into Oriental Orthodoxy. That's what they were a part of. There were no Arians there anymore. Those in Najran, they might have been either Church of the East. They might have been Church of the East rather than the Oriental Orthodox, but I really suspect that there were probably some weird cultic heretics hanging out in Najran, and I think that that's where Muhammad got some of his ideas, and why he got the particular name Nasara, which was not used by anyone else at that time and hadn't been hundreds of years, except by a very few heretics were particularly using this term. So this is my suspicion. So we talked about Thamud and Saleh, and we found out that this was a very muddled idea of of people in of Al-Hijr, which just got abandoned gradually in the 200s AD, and Muhammad made up a story about it, or he picked up a story that people were telling about it. Now let's find another group of people called Ad, who are also supposed to be super, super ancient guys, like massively ancient guys. These are the people of Hud, right? So supposedly they were destroyed by winds. Now, most likely there was no people called Ad at all. It really means Al-Ad actually really means a really long time ago. So if you're talking about the ancient people, you would say the people of a long time ago, which would be this phrase. But in the traditions, it's universally connected to the Ubar people. So a long time later, this place called Iram of the Pillars would pick up this idea that was this Ubar location, where that it was somehow now called a city called Ubar, but it wasn't. It was in the early Islamic sources, the people are called Ubar, and it's only 1,000 years later that this gets, or nearly 1,000 years later that this gets transferred to the name of a city. So this is, we can throw out the late Islamic legends, right? And in the descriptions, yeah, I like Robin Hood. Yes, very nice. Or Hud. The city has pillars, it has a fort, and it has gardens, right? And so we need to find a place that actually has those things. So the best, and it is actually in the Islamic tradition, it is always put in the area of Oman, somewhere out there. Now, this connects directly to the people called Ubartai on Ptolemy's map. So it is the way different letters work whenever they're moved into Greek. The Ubaritai are definitely the Ubari people, okay? And they're on the map, and they're located near where they should be for this to be the correct place. And so Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, they used satellite imagery to try to find a likely location for this. And a very, very likely location came up, and it's specifically this place called modern day Shisser, right? And was probably Omanum Emporium on Ptolemy's map, but Ptolemy's map is not fabulous for these areas because he just was not very sure of his geography here. And so this was a very ancient location in terms of human habitation, and it flourished as a city in the late BC period. However, an underground cavern collapsed, and remember, it's around 300 BC that we really start getting this frankincense trade kicking up again and becoming important. And so people start getting rich from it. And so it's at this time that this city becomes, or that this location starts turning into a city. And so it becomes bigger and wealthier, huge fortifications, really impressive city. And then there was an earthquake far away, which caused a huge amount, a big chunk of the city to just fall into a cavern that collapses underneath it. And after that, they just don't rebuild it because it had already been in heavy decline at this point, because the frankincense trade was now very heavily by land. It was also a lot less important because Christians just did not use the same amount of incense that the pagans did. And so slowly it was buried in dunes. And so it being buried in dunes gave it the impression, if you were looking at it, that a wind had come and thrown the sand on it, but really it was just an earthquake that had caused it to fall in. It's kind of funny that the Quran thinks that the people who just abandoned it were destroyed by an earthquake, but the people who were hit by an earthquake were destroyed by wind. Can't get any detail right? Now, there are a number of other cities around that Aubaritai people that disappeared that maybe could qualify, but whichever city it actually was on his map, it really probably was Shisher, because Shisser is the only one that has, it's the only place that you'd say that this is a place with pillars. Of all the places, you'd go, yeah, that's the city that's got the pillars, because the other places that are in ruins, they're smaller, they're a lot less impressive, they don't have these incredible dunes coming in and taking it over, and they certainly don't have these pillars for you to go, wow, that is that city of the pillars there. And the funny thing is that this happens after Al-Hijr is abandoned. So we have Saleh warning people about the abandonment of a city, or the destruction of a city that has not yet been destroyed in the Quran, with typical Qur'anic sense of history. Very excellent here. So Constantine, so Constantine the Great is kind of our next figure. We're jumping back in time a little bit to deal with what's happening in Rome. And of course, this is the famous Constantine who supposedly founded Christianity, according to all the conspiracy theorists. So if we go back to 286, Diocletian, who was the emperor then, he wanted to resolve the crisis of the 3rd century. A whole bunch of social problems were happening, and you were also beginning to have some major invasions of barbarians at the borders and stuff. And so he decided to split the empire into 4 administrative districts. You can see the 4 different colors there. There's an east with like head emperor and then a junior emperor, and then the west with a head emperor and a junior emperor, 4 in all. Okay, he sets this up, works great through his death, works great through the next Western co-emperor, but then the son of that Western co-emperor, right, whenever that Western co-emperor dies, he wants to be the next emperor. He doesn't want like the other junior emperor to take over, and he wants to be that whether or not the guy on the other side, the other full emperor, agrees. So he gets himself proclaimed emperor by his troops, and that was a legitimate way to become emperor, was to be acclaimed by your troops. It was not inherited, and this would cause all kinds of problems for, and already had, right? All kinds of problems for many different years. Yes. Apparently I need to check the Catholic Encyclopedia and the website of the Vatican where it says that Constantine founded Christianity, right?
It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website.
It is on their website, apparently. So anyway, he had...
Right next to Alexander, the brothers, they did it together.
So he's going to have this big war between him and the Eastern Emperor. And right before the huge battle of Milvian Bridge, he has a dream in which he hears a voice say, "In this sign conquer," and it's a Christian symbol on it. It's not actually a cross, but it's a Christian symbol. Fun fact of the day, it wasn't a cross, it was a different Christian symbol. But anyway, it's a Christian symbol. He puts it on his standards. He promises, he prays to God. He says, "If I win this, because you've done this with this standard on there, then I'll become a Christian." And so he wins, and he's like, "Well, maybe I won't become a Christian yet, but I'll tell you what, I'll legalize Christianity. How about that?" And so in 313, decriminalized Christianity, and it protected all religious freedom, but it also specially returned Christian property. So it was general tolerance of religion, but also a special return of Christian property because they were the ones being really persecuted. But then in 321, he specifically banned government activity on Sunday because pagans used to sue Christians and make sure that the suing stuff appeared on the Sunday because Christians would not want to attend, and so try to make them choose between losing a court case or observing their faith by going to church, right? And so he said, "Nope, we're closing the government on Sundays, so you can't mess with Christians by doing stuff to them on Sundays. Leave them alone," right? So yes, Yusuf Este should be on the watch list for inflicting the crime of gross and extreme stupidity. Then in 324, he chose the small city of Byzantium as the site for Constantinople, and he defeated his co-emperor and reunited the entire empire once again, totally under himself. Then in 325, there's the first ecumenical council that had widespread attendance, and so it's just generally called the first ecumenical council because there had been councils before, but it wasn't necessarily safe to travel. Pope didn't even show up to this one, by the way. He just sent a delegate. So that was in Nicaea, the first council of Nicaea.
You really should have said Bishop of Rome. It's somewhat ambiguous whether he would have taken the title of Pope. No,
he did not have the title of Pope yet at all. It was not in use. People like to say, at this point we had monarchical bishoprics. So basically you had a bishop who was over priests. It was not a brotherhood of priests within a church. And you also had recognized head bishops of larger areas. So even though the bishop of Antioch would be called a bishop, then he would still have a whole bunch of bishops under him anyway. The bishop of Rome would just be the bishop. We'd have a bunch of bishops under him anyway, right? Freebird has the expensive span of a gnat. So he shows up and immediately posts this because he's not smart enough to follow.
The Freebird Muslim has entered the chat and let everyone know why he's a Muslim. Because he's bored by facts. He only likes lies. He's a Muslim.
That makes you a Muslim. All right. So this council specifically dealt with the Arian heresy, which I already explained was that in some way there was God and then a generation. They wouldn't even say in time. They'd say like at a point in ages or something, there was the generation of the sun before regular creation happened, right? And that was a hypercorrection of the Sabellian heresy. They thought that was a way to keep from saying that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirits are just different modes of God, which going from one heresy that doesn't make any sense to another doesn't actually solve your problem, guys. Anyway, it dealt with that heresy. And supposedly put to rest, but it would take a long time before it was really entirely defeated, because it ended up getting lots of support from the emperors. Seems rather odd that the emperors would have a council that goes against what they want, and then they push against it constantly, and yet the bishops went out in the end because their position actually makes sense and his doesn't. So this is kind of the closer look at where everything is so that you can see in more detail. So now I'm going to talk about the spread of influence of the church. And through one, Armenia declared Christianity as its state religion because it's a very small country and is able to make changes quickly, right? And 313, as discussed before, Edict of Milan, Christianity is no longer illegal. It's general religious tolerance, but was really aimed toward the Christians. And around 330, Ezana, the first Christian king of Aksum, remember that's our Abyssinian country, he makes Christianity the state religion. Then in 356, Theophilus the Indian, who's actually from South Arabia, he plants 3 Arian churches in Yemen, but he gets rebuffed by the Orthodox Ezana, and very soon those churches are totally under control of the Oriental Orthodox, right? Then the last thing that we need to talk about is Theodosius the Great. That's Theodosius the First, not the one that the 7 sleepers supposedly woke up under, but one who ruled roughly half a century before. He reunited the Roman Empire. That would be the last time it's reunited in the history of Rome, that you'd have one single intact Roman Empire. He made Christianity the state religion because after that, Constantine followed the Eastern and Western thing where he'd delegate things to his sons, and other people did that too. But Theodosius said, no, I'm going to rule the whole thing, right? He made Christianity the state religion. He also defined Catholic and church. Like, you can't say that you're Catholic and you can't say that you attend a church or part of the church unless you are Trinitarian, unless you follow Nicaea in 360, because that's what the bishops have decided. That's what we are going with. That is correct. So if you don't say that, then you can't use these terms. So whatever you are, you can't like dress up, as Mormons do now. They're like, oh, we have a church. No, you don't. You have a building, but you're no part of a church because you're not part of Christ's church, right? No, Theodosius is not the one who married the repentant prostitute, and Justinian's wife was almost certainly not a prostitute. That was a smear against her by someone who really hated her guts, but she was a good empress, so I don't know why they hated her so much.
You gotta let me read the comments, Mary.
Sorry.
Sheesh, you're reading everything. You're just
I'm
like on
everything.
such a roll.
I am.
You're on such a roll that even when I bring up a comment to get one word in on my stream, you read that too.
Yep. All right. So, and then he begins issuing laws against pagan practices in different ways. And 391, like he strips state support from the pagan temples used to get state support. They don't anymore. Over time, everybody's required to be baptized as an infant, which is more than a little bit ridiculous, because it gives people false confidence in their salvation, just because they got forced to be dunked. Like, it's not even their parents didn't even believe for them. No, they're getting forcibly dunked by law, and now I'm totally fine to do whatever, I guess. But so those are the sorts of things that happened. Then the Sassanids are going to be our big old Persians that we're dealing with from now on, because before we've had different Persian groups in the past. We had the Achaemenids, who were the ones who went up against Alexander, we've had the Parthians. Even before that, there were the Arsacids and other folks who were Persian sorts of folks. But these Persian-y folks are back again, and they're back in control, and they're not being Hellenistic anymore, because the Seleucids, their aristocracy was from Greece, and so they were all about combining Athena with Eastern practices and stuff. Nope, these folks are like, nah, we're going to go back again to Zoroastrianism, and we're going to follow that, and we are true Persian type peoples. Again, I'm using Persian very loosely. And they conquered the Greco-Bactrians, and this is one of the most powerful Sasanian Shah and Shahs, their most powerful emperors, if you will. They were endangered by the Roman Julian the Apostate. He rejected Christianity, by the way, and he campaigned very far east, but he was just so incompetent that he got killed. After that, after a while, there's a peace treaty, and Rome agreed that Rome and Persia together, we are going to help each other against these barbarians who keep wanting to come through the Caucasus Mountains. And so Rome agreed to help Persia and anytime that they come through, right? And this will become an important point of contention later, because they would eventually agree to help them with money. And the Sassanid dynasty was like, nope, got to keep paying us this payment money. And since you're paying us money, that means that you're really our vassal. And Rome was like, no, we're just helping pay you to protect the border. And if you're not really doing anything for us, why should we give you money? And so that would cause all kinds of conflicts later. This is also the period in which Manichaeanism emerged. Now, Mani was the prophet of Manichaeanism. He combined elements of Platonism, Marcionianism, other Gnostic and Jewish stuff, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and pagan Mesopotamian religion, put in a big fat blender, shook it all up, mixed it all together, and that's Manichaeanism. It would go all the way to China and would continue in China through the 1200s, if not 1400s, and it went all the way west into North Africa, and that is what Augustine had followed for a while as Manichaeanism before he became Saint Augustine. So this is our last slide, and this is about the destruction of that red dot out in the empty quarter that had been the where all the trade routes went through. So it had originally been established by Armenians. Those are the guys who worshipped Wad and had Allah of Ma'in, right? They had originally set it up as a trading post, became really rich at that time, and it became the capital of this Qur'anic Arab group in the 1st century. But then the Lakhmids, and we'll learn a lot more about the Lakhmids later, they're from just south of Babylon, and they're another Arab group who established a quite powerful kingdom. But they're like, no, we want to take over this portion of this really expensive trade route. We want to dominate here. So they expelled them, and they put their clients, the Kinda, over and controlling it in the 1st century. Well, the Sabaeans didn't like that very much. They really wanted this important city, so they campaigned against them, and they managed to make those Western Kinda their clients, while the Eastern Kinda stayed with the Lakhmids, who were themselves associated with the Sassanians, right? But the Lakhmids are like, fine, if we don't control the city, why on earth should we be have anything to do with it, right? Why should we be taking our wealth there to trade? We'd rather go somewhere else. We'd rather go to Khaybar, because that Khaybar was heavily allied with the Sassanians, because Khaybar was controlled by Jews. Jews didn't like Rome, so Jews liked the Sassanians because Sassanians didn't like Rome. So they're like, we'll go trade with these guys instead. And so they pretty much abandoned it, and so it fell out of favor. So now, finally, the main trade route goes from Najran up to Medina. And so now it goes through Taif. Now it goes 1.5 days ride away from where Mecca will be. So finally we have a reason for Mecca to sort of exist. because we have a road through
Sort of
Taif
existence.
and we have Jeddah. Yes, it might possibly exist because there's an important route here now instead of just a backwater route. And we have Jeddah on the other side. So at this point, an opportunity arises for a path through the mountains to get a shrine. And we'll find out more about kind of our information about this later. So anyway, that city in the desert was entirely abandoned in the 300s, in the 4th century AD, and that is kind of sets the stage for Mecca to have some sort of meaning to anyone at all after this point. So yeah.
New the Islamic talking point. Mecca, the might have been, could be,
Yep.
greatest city in the history of the world, from which all other cities descend from.
Yep. So that is my presentation for today. We have located not only our dhul-qarnyn and his true story, but we've also located when Saleh, who has the name of a pagan high priest of a pagan god, right? So we have these things occurring now. So I need, but it's happening in the wrong millennium. Like I would need him to be 3 millenniums before, but he's not. So we've also found Hud, and he's also several millenniums late, and the people were abandoned the place for the wrong reason because there was an earthquake and not a wind. Maybe Muhammad wasn't listening well and assigned the earthquake and the wind to the opposite ones, and he really meant to do it reverse. But these are, that's what you get in Islam. People displaced, making no sense, silly stories.
Silly stories, yeah, that's definitely what you get in Islam. So we'll go ahead and open up the chat now for anyone who wants to come up and have an on-topic discussion. I suspect there won't be any. Our friend was in the chat earlier. Yeah. He left a long time ago. There would have been an exception for him since we told him on, what was that?
Yep. I told him when to show up, and he decided to show up early and then talk off topic. So, is this true? Was this made up? What was the thing that he thought was made up? It was just this is hilarious. He thought that the map of Israel and who ruled when. Oh, how do you know? For some reason, he thinks that Christian history is like Islamic history, where there are like 0 sources outside of our tradition for it. Yeah, makes just very, very silly. So, like, how would you know? The Tetrarchy of Philip? Oh, Philip must be made up, just like all of our prophets are made up. So, if you have any questions about these particular characters, and you notice that they talked about the folks in here, that what they do is that they attack you and they take you slaves if they can, and they steal from you. That's all that is said about the people in these places. And something that's very interesting is how little Islamic history knows about any of these people. Islamic history does not know about Lihyan, does not know that they existed, does not know about the Minians. I mean, they know about the tribe that existed at the time of Muhammad, but have no idea about their connection to anything. They think that Thamud owned the cities that Lihyan ruled, right? They don't know any coherent history. It's all made up. And it just shows what a new group the Quraysh are. Because even whenever you have oral histories, your oral histories are rooted in who you are, right? So they are rooted in in your cultural identity of yourself, and that shows how new the Quraysh are as a people, that they have such short memories. There is zero about this entire, like, Yemen having forts in Oxum having forts in Yemen and having a governor in Najran, for heaven's sake, back in the 2nd century AD. Not a fragment of that is remembered. We know about this because of inscriptions. There are multiple inscriptions that talk about what real kings did. They don't know the names of any of these kings. The only Ethiopian king they know the name of before Abraha is, they remember that Yusuf is the name of the king who oppressed the Christians. That happened in like their grandparents' lifetimes, basically.
I have some comments from the audience, from Nina. For real, this isn't a religion of tafsir. I'll trust me, bro. Well, I mean, it kind of is. That's a religion anyway. I mean, maybe it shouldn't be, but it certainly seems to be the case. Freebird says that he has nothing to say on this topic, which is very useful to know that you have nothing to say and yet you're still here anyway. Maybe you should care about the history of your own religion. That shows that it's inauthentic, but yeah, you know, whatever, to each their own.
So Freebird, why is it that Muhammad thinks that Al-Hijr was destroyed in super ancient times when it was just gradually abandoned in the 3rd century, in the 200s AD? It was slowly abandoned. So why is it that he talks about Saleh, which is the name of the high priest, meaning messenger or apostle, right? That he thinks that Saleh is the name of a particular man, and that he is a prophet of Allah. So let me know why Allah didn't know. Well, Freebird, if the Quran talks to you about Saleh and says that he's a prophet from a long time ago, and that Allah came and destroyed a place in an earthquake a long time ago, and really it had only been destroyed about, it had been gradually abandoned about 300 years, beginning about 300 years before Muhammad. It was never destroyed. People just left. And the buildings that Muhammad apparently thinks belong to, are like houses, were just rock cut tombs. They were fancy tombs. And there was no call to monotheism there that happened. Like, why would the Quran get all of that wrong? Why does the Quran think that Hud's people, Ad, were destroyed by a wind when an earthquake actually caused a cavern underneath the city to collapse, and then they just didn't bother to build it back again? And that it happened between 300 and 500 AD. It was quite recent, even more recent. And you have Saleh here. Well, you should read the Quran and come back to me. Read the Quran, read the sources about Saleh, read about when he was supposed to exist. And he's talking about the people of Ad and telling them, watch out, it's going to happen to you like Ad. But Al-Hijr was abandoned and people just left it. It was abandoned a few years before the earliest date that the earthquake could have come and heavily damaged the city that's called Imram of the Pillars. So, and I have actually looked at all the other places that they think might have possibly been Ubar, and only one of them has pillars. And since the only description that's given of it is that it has pillars, that's why it's important. It's the place that has the pillars. It's the important looking place. It's not like a small town. And they were all abandoned kind of in the same time period. It does give you a history. It gives his story.
Mary, stop interacting with Freebird. The chat will have no idea why you keep saying.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So,
And I don't want to encourage him to keep saying nonsense either by keep having you reply.
he is
So he says,
actually on topic though.
yeah, he's on topic, which is great.
How
But he
long
says
would
he
that?
doesn't know anything about this
Hmm.
subject, which is fine. Yeah, if he doesn't know anything, that's fine. But he should educate himself. He should
Yeah.
take this information and he should go and try to figure out who this individual is, because your Quran claims that it explains itself in great detail, and you say, well, it doesn't. Right? That's your response, is that it doesn't. And I think you're actually right. It really doesn't tell you very much, because it's just reminding you of things that came before, even though it's supposedly the perfect revelation of Allah.
Well, it does give his name, and we know that his name is the title of a pagan priest in that same city. He does explicitly warn the people, right? He's warning the people that they will be like Ad, but Ad had not yet been destroyed. And his people are supposed to be destroyed by an earthquake, but there was no earthquake. They're also supposed to like live in the walls, but they didn't. They didn't live in the walls. They just carved tombs in the walls. And so people
And,
went by it and went, that looks like a cool house, but it was just a tomb. So.
and to be clear, there should be strong evidence of an earthquake. This is not something that you can just be like, well, we don't know, no one wrote it down, blah, blah, blah. Unlike most things, you have physical evidence of earthquakes. And if it
Yeah,
had destroyed a city and it left uninhabited, you would have really good evidence of that.
yeah, it's supposed to be such a massive earthquake. I mean, there have been lots of tiny earthquakes in the Hijaz all the time, right? But this is supposed to be an earthquake so massive that it killed everyone except for Saleh. So when you have an earthquake, like when they went to the city below where the Ubar people were, right? When they went to that city, they're like, hey, a cavern collapsed because there was an earthquake some distance away and it destabilized this cavern and it fell, so we know it was an earthquake. Like they knew. But there is no heavy earthquake around the time that it was abandoned. There was no big earthquake. It was just abandoned because it wasn't important anymore and it wasn't very well protected. People would rather live places where Arabs won't come and kill you or take you as a sex slave. So, yeah.
So Nina asked what book was sent to Salah, but I do want to say that that's not necessarily valid, because Islamic belief is that only some of the prophets get books. They don't necessarily all get books. But
Well,
funny.
official Islamic belief is that the difference between a prophet and a messenger is that a messenger gets a book and a prophet doesn't. But that's not the way the word is used in the Quran, because it does say that every town has gotten its own messenger, not a prophet. And yet that is not like what standard Islamic belief is that not every single town in the history of the world has gotten its own book, but rather every history in the town in the history of mankind has gotten its own prophet. And I guess if they spoke the same language as somebody else who already had a book, you wouldn't need one, because you're only supposed to have one book in each language, right? So what the Quran says and what theology says are in conflict.
But we do have a solution. Moses says it was a metaphorical earthquake, and Numidian said
Metaphorical.
mutaphorical. And,
Yes.
and Numidian says it was a metaphorical destruction. Yep, sounds good, right? Whatever post hoc explanation you need to make it work is obviously the actual truth. That is the standard of Islam. And Dr. Whitemeat says that it was the San Andreas Shake.
And they did indeed shake, right?
Indeed. Super chat from Morek.
O son of Adam, spend. I will spend on you. Give, then I will give you. It's difficult because you know what? These are my last few. As it is, the price is going up, the rand is going down, this is happening. Excuses. Those are excuses. You give and watch what Allah does.
How appropriate. The comment says, I will pay for this lesson. And Enmark left several other very nice comments about your teaching and whatnot. And they says he wishes he could afford more. And then, and then our sheikh or mufti friend, I should say, comes on and says, excuses, you give, you give. It doesn't matter if you have money or not. So very appropriate there.
Yep.
But breakfast gone. He has refuted everything you said. He said they have very nice isnads.
Yep. Well, so I think more might be a she, but I'm not sure because the thing's tiny on my screen. But anyway, thank you very much for the donation. Yeah, the reason I'm doing all this is that I'm setting up, because you're going to go, if you actually try to study the Islamic sources, they're going to have these crazy stories about this king and this king doing this and that king doing that. And these kings didn't exist. Like, none of them are real. We can construct a fairly decent, and the like, if you go to the page on Himyar on Wikipedia, it's full of total nonsense about all these kings. They get added to the king list who never existed just because they're in the Qur'anic sources. Like, Islam doesn't know what happened just a short time ago that other oral cultures preserve, because they themselves have such a new identity at the time that Muhammad shows up, that if it happened before about 430 AD, they haven't got a clue that this existed. Like, Rome campaigning down the greatest empire that they know of in the world, campaigning down into Yemen. You should remember that. That's scary, whether or not they came near you. No memory. No memory of Abyssinia controlling parts of Yemen. No memory. So, and they have these funny stories where, like, they try to reenact parts of Daniel with these various silly historical, like, the king had a dream and he didn't know what it meant, so he asked two random pagans who happened to be slaves from other countries what it meant, and they interpreted his dream, and it was really about vaguely about the coming of Muhammad. And so, they just kind of steal stories and try to apply them from the Bible to these made up characters. And they just don't have any history, so they just have to make it up. It's quite spectacular how little history they have. And even the story of Abraha is totally, it's a total mess. And it's only very, very recently, like within the past 20 years, that we can have those sorts of things happen. So, Freebird, you can tell whether or not an earthquake happened because the earth. Go ahead and read it. Sorry about that.
Well, you already said it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's even if there isn't a city, right? Even if the ruins of a city are gone or whatever, there are geological features in the region. People who are experts in this type of thing, they can tell you about every earthquake that's taken place in a region just by going to an undisturbed geological feature, because an earthquake affects everything. It doesn't just, it's not like a tornado that just hits one region. It affects everything, right, in the region.
So you still think that it might be from thousands of years ago. The story in the Quran is that you can travel in the land and you can see the places that were destroyed before. And when a place is destroyed, then it's destroyed. It's gone. That place is gone. It's wiped out. It doesn't come back. And so the actual buildings from the 2nd and early 3rd century, shortly before it was abandoned, those buildings are ascribed. It is in Al-Hijr. It was in the correct location, right? Those buildings have to belong to before Saleh. So Saleh has to come after or during these very last buildings are built. These buildings were built in the 100s and 200s AD. There was no earthquake, and the earthquake is also supposed to have killed everyone by throwing the houses down on top of them, and no such great earthquake happened at that time anywhere in that area, or anywhere anywhere in the Hijaz, anywhere in Syria, anywhere there is no great earthquake that touched that region during any of that period of time. But it's thousands of years off, Freebird. Muhammad, the Quran, all the sources, they think that these rock-cut buildings were cut and then abandoned thousands of years ago when they were only abandoned a few hundred years ago.
And besides that fact, even if it was thousands of years ago, the geological record dates back tens of thousands of years, and there's no geological record of the earthquake, no written record outside the one sentence or two sentences, whatever, in the Quran. It did not happen, period.
Yeah. And there are lots of stone buildings there, and there are stone ruins, and they have not been affected by a big earthquake in that time period. They just haven't. So I really encourage you, and I'll upload this particular presentation because I actually pulled it out and made it separate to make it easier to pin, right? And look at when Saleh had to have lived, except there's no earthquake, and he lived in the wrong, because remember that the Quran talks about how the prophets were specially taken, prophets and messengers were specially taken just from the line of Israel for a very long time, right? They were taken just from the line of Israel after Israel comes along, or at least after Moses. After Moses, supposedly, they're all from Israel until Muhammad, even in Qur'anic theology. This is right in the middle of that time, and that's also at the time when there aren't supposed to be any prophets. There's supposed to be no prophets between Jesus and Muhammad. And the only time that either Hud or Saleh could have existed was in that time, right? It was in that time when there's not supposed to be anyone. And if there was anybody, they were supposed to be Jewish, and they certainly weren't Jewish.
So, Freebird, you're misunderstanding the argument. You said, but let's say we found town ruins. How would you still verify their people? You can't really be 100% sure. The point is, there's no record of an earthquake, period. It's not it's not all speculation. Earthquakes are more or less random, but that has nothing to do with looking back at the past. You can look at the geological records and you can tell whether a large earthquake hit a region or not. It doesn't matter. The missing town ruins is problematic, but it actually doesn't matter.
Yeah, that they're all there. The ruins are still there, and there is evidence of what happened, just like they were able to determine that the city of the Ubarites, or the Ubari, right? They were able to determine that city was destroyed because a cavern collapsed, because there was an earthquake far away, and they were able to even identify where the earthquake was that managed to mess that up.
Yeah, exactly.
With the same methods and the same ways, they're able to say, no major earthquake happened in this area. And remember, this was part of the Roman Empire. Romans kept tons of records. They would have said, hey, one of our Roman cities was absolutely destroyed in this earthquake. And the entire idea of the Quran, that there has been a prophet for every city. Who was the prophet for Rome? Who was the prophet for Carthage? Who was the prophet for Sidon? Who was the prophet for Assur? Who was a prophet for Babylon? Every city is supposed to have its own prophet from its own people, but all of these places never had any of these monotheistic prophets. It never existed. But according to Islamic theology, because this was a city, it had to have had a prophet, and it needed to be destroyed after it rejecting that prophet. Hey, Adnan, get up. Come join.
Yeah, he's back.
Yeah, he needs to join now.
And Romans burnt Bibles. Well, great. That didn't remove the contents. You have you're just repeating a silly polemic and not thinking.
Click on the link,
Adnan. Talk to us live. In the meantime, we have a super chat from Jack Ray.
Who ate the apple? You ate the apple, the whole apple. Yes, the whole apple. You ate it. But a small seed, you left it. You put it back into the earth. What happened? Allah, through His power, caused that to grow and to give you how many apples? Thousands.
Thousands of apples. Thousands and thousands and thousands of apples. Thank you once again for all your donations, Jack Ray. So since Adnan's back in the chat, we'll wait a few minutes to see if he comes up live. Otherwise, I was getting ready to end the program.
Yep.
But Adnan, chat is open. We'd love to bring you up here and talk about your theories of Bible corruption or whatever you want to call that.
And I'll be right back. I'm going to take a break, and I will be right back.
Then. Now let's see. Dhul-qarnyn was the prophet of Rome. Yeah, he founded the Catholic Church in Rome 300 years before Jesus Christ was born. And if you don't believe me,
It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website.
so therefore he is the prophet of Rome. It all makes sense now. You see, we're finding the truth of Islam. Is that you, Adnan?
Yes, sir.
Welcome to the chat.
Thank you.
So Mary had to go to the bathroom or whatever. She'll be right back, but we can get the conversation started. So on the previous, for those who don't know, at the end of the supergroup chat on Friday/Saturday, you called in and you were telling us that the Bible has many lost books, by which you just meant books that are not included in the Bible, which I guess by that standard, every book has many lost books of it, because there are many things that aren't included in any book. Harry Potter is now a lost book of the Bible. So if that isn't your standard, then you have to tell me what is the standard for something being a lost book of the Bible.
Well, thank you for having me. When I said the lost books, you're right. The books that didn't make it to King James, in that logic, yes. But even outside of that, I mean completely lost. Like if you read the Second Kings, it talks about the kings, and it says the Chronicles, the kings of Judah, the Chronicles, the kings of Israel. Every time the king died, it said, if you want to know more about it, read the Chronicles of the kings of Judah, or the Chronicles of the kings of Israel.
So I would agree those books are lost, but for you to call them lost books of the Bible, you would have to have some reason to believe they were supposed to be part of the Bible. That's kind of my point here. I mean, by that standard, any lost work could be called a lost work of the Bible, right? So what makes you think it was ever part of the scripture? It was a book. It was a record. More specifically, it was a record of the kings. That was some sort of official record. But why do you think it was inspired scripture and belongs in the Bible?
No, I just want to know more about the kings, and they're lost. But no problem. I'll give you that. Now let's talk about something really important. So there's two religions. Would you agree? One of them can only be true: Christianity or Islam.
Well, they could both be false. But so there's a third possibility.
I don't think so. I think it's either Christianity or Islam. I say Islam. You folks say
Adnan,
Christianity.
hey, we need to stop. We need to stop changing topics. We need to stay on topic until we deal with this. So now there is a book.
He conceded the point. He said
he did, but like sort of conceded and then ran away really fast to a different point. So let's make sure that this is put to bed so it won't come back again. Okay. So you understand that there would be lots of books in the past that were written in Judah that were even part of royal libraries that would not be scripture of God, right?
No problem. And okay. I agreed.
So whenever it says that this is written in another book, like even Joshua, for example, that doesn't mean that those were ever considered scripture, which would be, by the way, why they weren't specially preserved unlike the things that were considered scripture. So when the people were taken away into captivity, they had to choose what to take. And so what they took was the stuff that they considered to be scripture. What they didn't take are the stuff that they considered, even if it was super important to them, even if it was stuff they cared about, it wasn't scripture. So it didn't make the cut to be saved. Yeah?
Yeah,
So
no,
that's why. So that's why it isn't there. So it's not a lost book of the Bible.
No problem,
it's just
Mary.
a lost book of history.
I already concealed.
Okay.
You guys
All
got
right.
it. You're good. But I just want to know, right? Can you make the case of Christ? Because remember, I said, I know this is off topic, but hey, I'm getting you guys good views, so it's okay. So Christianity or Islam? You say Christianity, I say Islam. Can you make the case for Christianity?
I sure can.
Oh, please.
I mean, I can't in 5 minutes. I mean, we're talking about a serious subject here. But let me just tell you a very, very brief answer, and then you can tell me what your case for Islam is based on. Not give me the whole case, just what it's based on, and then we can go from there. So the reason that Christianity is the truth is because all of Christianity stands on one historical event, the resurrection, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that event holds up to historical scrutiny. It is the best explanation for the available evidence that is relevant to that particular question. If Jesus rose from the dead, then he demonstrates who he is. He demonstrates that he is God incarnate because he predicted his own death and resurrection. And he wouldn't be authenticated if he was a liar. Therefore, we can trust Jesus. If what he says is true, then Christianity is the truth because that is what he taught. So that's
Now,
my very short explanation. So now, same to you. You can give a very short explanation why you think Islam is the truth.
Oh, I don't really need to talk about Islam. I know you folks don't like it, but I want to know, because I'm Muslim, I want to know.
No, we
about
love talking about
Christ.
Islam. What do you mean?
No, but I'm already Muslim. Wouldn't it make sense to learn more about Christ? I already know about Islam. So I'm just interested.
No. So you set up a dilemma. You said that there's two possibilities.
Right.
One is that Christianity is true. One is that Islam is true.
Right.
If you don't present any evidence, then we have no reason to believe that Islam is the truth, no matter how much you dispute our evidence.
No, I'm saying for my truth that Islam is the truth, but outside of my truth, Christianity could be true. So I want to know about Christianity. I didn't mean to make it sound like I'm going to make the case for Islam. No, I want to know about Christ. You know what I mean?
No one has their own truth.
No, I
That's
want
just
the
silly.
truth. No. I want the truth.
Well, one of the reasons.
What he's saying, he's saying that Islam
Yeah.
could be false. He's saying that Islam could be false. Christianity could be the ultimate truth.
Exactly right.
You know, I'm going to take him at it. I'm taking him as genuinely interested in Christianity, not up here trying to score points or have a philosophical religious debate. I think he is genuinely curious about Christianity.
Yes, sir.
And something that I would add to Thaddeus's case is that whenever we talk about what fits the evidence, so all the historical sources agree that Jesus was crucified. They also agree that the Romans were never able to produce his body after he was crucified and buried. And they also agree that his own followers believed that he resurrected. And as a result of that belief, they suffered terrible persecutions and had no benefit to themselves of that. We also know that it fits with how the Jews had interpreted their own scripture for at least 600 years, how they understood things were going to be, how they understood things to be. And while Jews did try to rewrite a large amount of their own faith following the destruction of the temple, they didn't really do it before then, but following the destruction of the temple, Jews had one of three reactions. They either became Christian, they invented their own crazy cult, and they're like, we're the real Christians here. Really, we are. Or they reinvented Judaism. They did not, the kind of Judaism that existed at the time of Jesus was extinguished between AD 70 and AD 270, let's say, that it went away, because the case for Jesus being the Messiah was so strong in their own readings of their own religion, what it always had been historically. And so the matching with prophecy, not post hoc matching with prophecy, not new explanations for prophecy, but rather the way it fit with how prophecy was understood then, and took like well over 1,000 years for Jews to heavily rewrite how they interpreted things, but even now they can't entirely get away from it. That it fits so well with that it was incredibly persuasive at the time, for anyone who had familiarity with the Jewish beliefs at the time.
Right, so that's an additional argument independent of my argument. This would be an argument for fulfilled prophecy. Gazwa in the chat said, even if Jesus died and resurrected, that doesn't make him God. Well, it means there is a God, and that God is validating him, and that Jesus claimed to be said God. So why would the God of the universe authenticate Jesus by raising him from the dead if he was not accurate in his claim to be God? Are you still there?
I think he just came back. Looks like, yeah, there he is. Wait, now he's Ahmed. I think this might be someone else. Is this still Adnan, or is this somebody new? Is
that you, Adnan?
No.
Oh, I think he may be having connection problems. I don't.
That's okay. Welcome to the chat, Ahmed.
It happens.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Yeah. Yes.
What comment would you like to make?
So actually, I was listening to your conversation. So actually, I did not get the point. So what you are going to say? You are going to say like Islam is wrong. So because that based on history, or what are you going to say? What is the conclusion? Because I could not.
Sorry, the conclusion of what? So you just mean this last little bit, or the presentation?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So what I'm doing, I think that are you new here?
Yeah, kind of, yes.
Okay, so what I've been doing is kind of going through all of history up to the point of Muhammad's career, and then I'm going to deal with Muhammad in the context of his world, and I'm going to put all the Quran into the correct order and things like this. So this was part of this. So the big picture here was of kind of the world events leading up to set the stage for Islam to occur. The finer details are that we have identified conclusively dhul-qarnyn and how he actually lived. And I have two different presentations showing conclusively that dhul-qarnyn is the fictionalized version of Alexander the Great. My last two presentations show that in huge detail, quoting sources, putting things side by side, showing this. And then this time, I am showing how I am also revealing two other prophets of Islam in their actual context when they had to have lived, because when their cities were destroyed or were abandoned, in the case of al-Hijr. So al-Hijr is supposed to be the city of Saleh, and yet it is abandoned. It isn't destroyed in an earthquake. People just leave it alone because it's just in a bad place. It's in a bad place, and there isn't much trade anymore, and it's kind of unsafe, and there are really safe cities nearby. So it's like, let's move a little while and live in a safer place, right? And so we know when it was abandoned. That was abandoned in the 3rd century, so in the 200s AD, which was thousands of years after Muhammad talked about it being abandoned. It was abandoned in the period between Jesus and Muhammad, when there aren't supposed to be any messengers or prophets. And the name of Saleh is the name of the title of the pagan high priest of that city and that culture. And then we have Ad, which has been found, which was destroyed even later, but Saleh says it's already been destroyed when he's talking to people, but it was destroyed even later, and it was destroyed by an earthquake, but it was supposed to be destroyed by a wind. And so it's destroyed in the wrong time period and by the wrong thing, and then people abandoned it, right? So those are the important things as far as Islam is concerned. Those are the very important things. The other stuff gives you an idea of what's happening in the world. It's not specifically Islam is true or false, but Saleh alone makes Islam false.
I don't see any valid points, because when it comes to the dhul-qarnyn, so most of the later scholars say he's the King Darius, so not the Alexander Great, because maybe the Quran never said his name, but all the earliest tafsir, they say he's Alexander Great, because based on their historical data, they went to that conclusion.
So hang on.
Let him finish his point.
Go ahead.
Let him finish his point. You talked for a long while.
Yep.
Let him get a point.
Okay.
But most of the modern scholars say he's not the Alexander Great, because Quran never said dhul-qarnyn is Alexander Great. So it is a tafsir. They say based on the data they have at that time. But most of the modern scholars, they deny that one. There's no way that dhul-qarnyn is a Alexander Great, because
So
Alexander Great, he's a pagan.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Is innovation a good thing or a bad thing in Islam?
Innovation bad thing, yeah.
So why are you going with the innovation of modern scholars over the classical sources that were better connected to the time and place which the text was written? Is it because the idea that it's Alexander is embarrassing and you don't like that idea?
No, first of all, the Quran never said the Alexander name. It was the tafsir, they say, based on the data at that time. They are human. They made a mistake. That's why all of the modern scholars say he cannot be Alexander Great.
Here's a quick question. Which modern scholars, not all of the modern scholars even of Islam, are there any scholars who are not Islamic who say that, oh yeah, it could be a son, whoops, wrong button. It could be a son of Darius. Does any ancient or does any non-Muslim scholar say that that is at all possible?
I think the opinion modern scholars say he cannot be Alexander Great. Some of the scholars say he's a Darius.
Hang on. Does any non-Muslim scholar have this opinion, or is it only some Islamic scholars who have this opinion?
I cannot conclude to say, but
okay. Hang on. So all non-Muslim scholars have the same opinion that all the ancient Muslim scholars had, which is that it is Alexander the Great. No, now, hang on, Ahmed.
Okay.
I have presented this in enormous detail over 2 previous presentations, but if you want to look at this very quickly, I will show you some of the reasons why people say that said that. If you can show my screen. So the dude's name is dhul-qarnyn, which means a 2-horned one. Yeah. We have actual ancient writings that talk about a man who had Alexander the Great having 2 horns upon his head. Do you see that? This is part of an ancient writing, and it's fiction, but it says he has 2 horns. And again, in a different one, this is the same one in a different place. It talks about that God says to him, "I have made horns of iron to grow on your head." This is about Alexander. All of the coins after the time of Alexander, after he died, his followers, the successors, issued coins that showed him with horns. So everybody who talked about someone with 2 horns, everyone would go, "Yeah, we know this guy. This is Alexander." It comes from this cult of Oasis of Siwa, which is this historical event that he went there, and the guy said, hey, you are the son of Zeus Ammon, who is shown with 2 horns. And then in another Alexander romance, we have this happening where he's identified as the son of this pagan god Ammon, who has the horns, right? Talks about the horns. Behold, the god of the ram's horns. That's him. Ammon is the god of the ram's horns. And then...
Yeah, I know. Already I heard these arguments. Okay. My point is, most of the later scholars say, we know from the evidence conclusively, Alexander Great is a pagan.
Okay, give me a piece of evidence.
Yeah, what evidence?
What evidence is there?
There's abundance, because there's no way he worship one god, because there's enough evidence. Let me go to some Islamic scholars. They say that one, like Maulana Abdul Kalam.
So your evidence that it can't be Alexander is that if it was, the Quran would be false.
Yeah.
Well, yes, you're right. If it was, the Quran would be false, and guess what? It is, and the Quran is false. You can't say that, oh, it's clearly not because he's a pagan. That's kind of the point. So, again, here's another a section about him being established on the earth, right? And he gets everything as a means, and then it talks about here he is reaching the setting place of the sun. And in this one, he reaches the setting place of the sun. And that word dark mud for dark, stinky mud, that stinky mud, fetid means stinky. It's a stinky sea. And this is very clearly, explicitly meant that everyone agrees that meant the sun was setting in a stinky mud or hot spring. There was some confusion about that because it seemed really odd that it was sinking in mud. So here is the long story talking about him finding the sun. Long story. And then the sun bows after setting in the story. And in the ahadith, the sun bows beneath Allah's throne after it sets. It's taken from this legend.
No, if these two stories some kind of a similar, that doesn't mean Islam got it from that one.
Okay.
So if you apply the same standard for the
Bible, Ahmed, you asked what the evidence was. We've presented some evidence. Now, your job is not to sit there and say, I deny the evidence. Your job is to bring counter evidence. You claim that lots of scholars have good reasons for it. That means they have evidence. If you don't know what that evidence is, then you need to go and look it up. Because we can't, all we're doing right now is you're appealing to authority and then denying anything presented to you. You need to actually bring evidence for your case to support it.
So
that is
Ahmed,
how logical argument works.
Ahmed, okay, you know that this story was told because someone asked Muhammad about this, right?
Okay, yeah.
So some people went to Muhammad and said, tell me about dhul-qarnyn. Or at least they didn't say dhul-qarnyn, right? They said, tell me about the one who goes from the east to the west, is what they say in all of the hadith and all the sources about this. They're like, tell me of the man who went from the east to the west, right? And this is his answer. Yes? To their question.
Yeah.
So did they ask him a question about someone that they knew about because they were testing him? Did they know what the right answer was? Or were they just making something up and this person doesn't exist?
Go ahead.
They're talking about someone they know, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay. So they know about someone who goes from the east to the west, okay? And this is supposed to be correctly answered with the story of dhul-qarnyn. That means that this answer has to be something that they recognize. If it isn't, he fails the test, right? Now, so they should know this because they are people of knowledge. Now, what is the story that the people of knowledge know about the one who goes from the east to the west? I am giving you the translation of those ancient passages, of these ancient sources that people of knowledge knew about. So these are literal words from these very, very old books.
Yeah,
So
the same because when we say it is the Cyrus the Great, we have the similar story for him because he is going to that Asia Minor, he is building a wall. So this is associated with the Cyrus. So we have the evidence for Alexander.
whoa,
Also, we
stop,
have the
stop,
Whoa, whoa,
stop,
evidence
whoa,
for
whoa,
stop.
whoa, whoa.
Nope.
Where did you get
You
that as associated with Cyrus? You just asserted that. I need a source.
So please tell me where Cyrus went to the setting place of the sun, and when would people of knowledge have known about this?
because Cyrus was a Persian emperor. Okay, so these Arabs, they are the neighboring countries.
Hang on, how far west did Cyrus go? People of knowledge had to agree that he's the one who went to the setting place of the sun. Did Cyrus go very far west?
Because the story is that dhul-qarnyn is the one who built the wall, like the Gog and Magog. Okay, so based on that one, Cyrus, because this is the story we have so for the evidence we have the same evidence for the Cyrus.
No,
because
Cyrus didn't build any wall. Cyrus did not build. No wall existed in the Caucasus Mountains at the time. It didn't exist. Cyrus didn't build one. You're just claiming that Cyrus built a wall, and he did not. So again,
Mary
this
cited
has to
numerous
be
primary sources.
So I need
I get right.
Yeah.
I get it, Ahmed, that you don't have the source, but you can't just keep saying something over and over again. If you don't have it, no problem. Go look it up, and we'll discuss it a different day.
So
okay?
you agreed.
We can't discuss. We're not going to discuss your assertions, right? You need to actually have evidence behind what you are claiming, and saying Cyrus did this and not being able to cite any source that agrees with that is not a valid piece of evidence.
Yeah, the Great Walls of the Persians. Hang on, the Great Walls of the Persians were not built by these Achaemenid Persians at all. They were built by the Sassanians. We haven't even reached the era in which they were building big walls. And the first fortifications that occurred not in Darbent Pass, but in the other pass, those had actually been built by Roman associated folks. So again, you agreed that this has to be someone that these people know about who have done these things. I have shown you that this event of him going and seeing the sun setting in a muddy pool comes directly from two different ancient stories of Alexander the Great that are made up, but are ancient, right? And then the story about him, we will, either torment them or treat them with goodness. And he says, for the one who does wrong, soon we will torment him. Then he will be returned to his Lord, and he will torment him with a terrible torment. But as for the one who believes and does righteous goods, etc., will be nice. Well, we have sources for that in these legends too, if you'll share my screen. So people guilty of death are marched near that particular location. And if they die, it's it's fine because they're guilty of death, not the innocent people, but rather the people guilty of death. And we also, so this is something that they recognized, right? These are from sources. And then now, what about the people who didn't take any shelter against the setting place of the sun? Where is a story about Cyrus about that? Because if you'll share my screen, there's a story about Alexander that says that in the place of the sun's rising is over the sea, and the people who dwell there, when that's the sun, is about to rise, flee away and hide themselves in the sea, that they be not burnt by his rays. And he passes through the places, etc., etc. So they don't have any place, they don't have any way to don't have any shelter against it, just like these people don't have any shelter against it.
Okay, let me make one
event
point.
For event.
Yeah, okay, I have shared the link. So in that link, it's in Wikipedia, you can see. In that one, dhul-qarnyn, the Cyrus the Great, his image is given, his coins. In that one also, we can see two horns, okay? So that is one evidence. So second evidence that he's building a wall.
Pause.
Okay, let me finish.
You provided a source. Let's look at that source.
Yes, please. Let's look at the source and let's see who. So you agree that the person with two horns on that is going to be the.
All right. So I have the Wikipedia article on dhul-qarnyn. Let's go. I'll find what you were talking about. Let's just read what Wikipedia says. The majority of modern scholars and Islamic commentaries identify al-Qarnayn with Alexander the Great. Early Muslim commentators and historians variously identified dhul-Qarnyn, most notably as Alexander the Great, and as the South Arabian Hittite king al-Sab bin Marthid. Some modern scholars have argued that the origin of the Quranic story may be found in the Syriac legends, but others disagree. So no support there in the summary of the article. Where am I going for whatever evidence you wanted me to look at?
Yeah, in the down section you can see this is related to the Cyrus the Great. Okay, in that one they say. So his image is given like that.
All right,
Yeah.
so here's what Wikipedia says. In modern times, some Muslim scholars have argued in favor of dhul al-Qarnayn being actually Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire and conqueror of Persia and Babylon. Proponents of this view cite Daniel's vision of the Old Testament, where he saw a two-horned ram that represents the kings of Medina and Persia. So, Mary, let's take this article one thing at a time. What would be the problem of that?
So each horn, to start with, each horn is a different king, and there are many other kings, and they're represented by other horns. So that would be one problem. Another problem would be the fact that
I just look at the image of Cyrus. In that one we can see the two horns, like in
that's
the
not an image of Cyrus, though. It's an image that Muslims lie about and say is Cyrus, the relief of a winged genie, or according to some scholars, Cyrus the Great. This is a divine figure. It is actually a picture of, guess who? It's a picture of divinity, of a genie. It's not a picture of the king. Kings were never depicted with wings in this, and they certainly weren't called the two-horned one. So
yeah, but why don't you read the full? According to some, it's a wing of a genie.
I already read you. Some Muslim scholars,
not Muslim scholars. Yeah, some scholars, not some Muslim scholars. Yeah.
You know, I could edit and put the word Muslim right there. There's no source for this. It's just a description of the picture. It's not. If this is your argument, is that a picture is captioned some scholars, then I feel really sorry for you if that's your evidence.
So again, this has
figure
to be
clearly
something.
has wings. Does Cyrus the Great have wings?
So do you
Does
really
Cyrus the Great have wings? Does the human Cyrus the Great have wings?
So also, do you really think Alexander has two horns? It is a symbolic, okay? So these are symbolic terms. So
oh my goodness. Yes.
Okay,
so yes, it was symbolic, the horns, but the horns were shown on him in coins. Now the wings were not things that were drawn on human beings. So this would not be this would not be rational to say that this must be Cyrus if it's a winged figure. Now we do know that Cyrus was a worshiper of Marduk. He cites not only Marduk but two other pagan gods and credits them for supporting him in conquering these lands. He was a pagan. He was not Zoroastrian. It was his successor who established Zoroastrianism. Now, you agreed that it has to be someone that the people would recognize. And I showed you event by event in sources that were being read at that time. So we have the event of having two horns. So there was the story of him having two horns that was there. Nobody would go, oh, Cyrus, he's the guy with two. No one would think that then. Then we have the event of the setting sun.
So Mary,
and we have
pause. We're going to take the rest of the points in this, but we need to see if Ahmed can be honest with us. So, do you have any evidence that this is a picture of Cyrus, other than the fact that someone captioned the article in Wikipedia according to some scholars? Because that is an appeal to authority and a really, really bad one, because anyone could have written that at any time. You could have written that 5 minutes before you called in.
I don't think it. Okay. Anyhow, so I can provide the evidence. I can go and study, and I can come up with evidence. That is, I can do that one. We can do it later. But
yes,
I need.
Let's do that.
Okay. Okay. I need to add one more point. So then we can move to a different topic. So if you apply the same standard, like as an example in the Bible, also in the Quran, we have the story of Jonah. But the story of Jonah, also we can find that one in the legends of Syriac legends. These are even before the Bible. So based on that, some modern scholars, they say the Bible took it from the legends. So that's been the same similar story. Also a story of Jesus. This one found in Egyptian legends. So
No,
these
it's
are
not.
similar stories. That
No,
No, it's
doesn't
no,
mean
not.
it's not. No.
It,
Okay. So Ahmed, I let you make your point. So this is called the tu quo que fallacy. When you can't defend your own religion and you say, or your own point in general, and you say, but look at you. You have this other problem. That somehow validates my problem. No, it doesn't. If what you were saying was true about the Bible, that would invalidate the Bible and it would not validate Islam. So the fact that you can't defend Islam means you have to play the game of running to the Bible, give very distorted information that's utter nonsense. For example, there is not one accredited historian in the entire world that says that the story of Jesus is based on Egyptian legends. That is a ridiculous idea that some moron proposed 150 years ago and was completely laughed out of academia for. That has not remotely comparable to Alexander and dhul-qarnyn.
okay. Okay,
so
I
hang
accept
on,
that
hang
one.
on, hang on,
But,
Ahmed.
but
We
okay.
agree that he's being asked a question here. So it should be something that's the same as something that exists. It has to be. It's a dhikr. That means a reminder. It has to be the same as something else that exists. And it needs to match the points well, and it needs to be what people would understand it as. So we have the event. We have the fact that he's described as two horns. Then we have the setting place of the sun. We have that exact event described in almost the exact terms in these pre-existing things. If it is a reminder, it is a reminder of something. We agreed to that. He's giving a reminder. It exists. It ought to remind people of something. So it matches this perfectly. We have the guilty ones will be punished, but the ones who are not guilty will not be punished. That matches an event perfectly right in the same section of the story. We have the event that the people had no shelter against the sun where the sun rises. We have that exact same thing in the story. Then we have the story of him going to a place where there are two mountains, and that there's specifically Majuj and Yajuj, Gog and Magog, specifically, right? So, and then we also have we have the people who could barely understand a word. They can't understand speech hardly at all. And we have that exact thing from a different one where they found some men who barked like dogs instead of speaking. Exact kind of event. Then now we need to have an event of the wall building, right? With Gog and Magog, we have that exact event where there is iron and there is copper and there is brass that are used to build a wall to keep out Gog and Magog, not some random something or others. Gog and Magog are kept out with brass and iron. And that is in a bunch of these stories.
Mary, you got to stop throwing so much stuff at him. So the point is that there are tons and tons of similarities between the Alexander legends and the Quran. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that these legends were written about Cyrus instead of about Alexander. That would not in any way make them truth, nor would it provide any explanation for why the Quran is copying from them. So you have way more problems than you realize. I'll give you a chance to make a point here, and then I want to read through the rest of this article, which you cited as your evidence. So go ahead. You have a chance to speak.
Yeah, my point is because I need some time to gather evidence, because I have gone through so many articles which suggest that he's a Darius or Cyrus. So maybe you have the evidence for the Alexander. Maybe we have the similar evidence for the Cyrus and other kings. So second thing, you are never explicitly mentioned. So if you find a similar story, that doesn't mean, like a story of Jonah, it is matching with the Bible. Right? I accept the story of Jesus, it is mythical one. It is completely wrong. But the story of the Jonah, it is fine. We can find scholar articles like they say the story of Jonah is even before Bible. That was a legend. So that means Bible is wrong. So
You're
okay,
probably
so
actually thinking of Noah, and we can discuss that evidence.
no,
But
not
again, it's a
Noah,
two
so
quote.
Jonah.
So the
We can
issue,
discuss
okay,
Jonah
hang
too,
on.
but
The
the point is it's a two quoque fallacy. You're
the
trying to jump
issue,
to the Bible. I got it, Mary.
okay.
You're trying to jump to the Bible because you can't defend what is in Islam. You said you needed time to prepare the sources, and I accept that. That is a valid response. So what I want you to do, I want you to watch Mary's presentation that goes through all of our evidence. Spend
It's
as
the
much
last
time.
two. Yeah, it's the last two. And the second one, I talk about all the things that Muslim scholars have said that it might be instead. And I've shown why this isn't true. Okay. So you can go and try to find some more evidence that I don't present that they have claimed. But I do go through all of that and I show why all of it's impossible. Because you have to remember from the beginning that Muhammad is supposed to be giving a dhikr. He's supposed to be reminding people of something that exists, okay?
Yeah, the thing is the Cyrus also the king, the neighboring kingdom. So it is also a valid point, right? Because he's not
Okay,
from
so
China or India,
you can stop
right?
repeating your
Okay,
talking points over and over again. You've already
okay,
said that you need time to gather the evidence, and I already accepted that as a
okay,
valid response. So what I want you to do is I want you to review the presentation that Mary has already given. You can
okay.
see our case. You know, you have the advantage because our case is laid out and you can respond to that. So once you've reviewed that and once you're comfortable, have gone through the Islamic sources and you think that you can argue for Cyrus on a point by point basis, then you can email me, thaddeus@reasonedanswers.com. If you forget, it's listed in the video description of every video, and say, this is Ahmed from the other day, or, last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever. I'm ready to have the discussion on whether dhul-qarnyn is Cyrus the Great or whether it is Alexander. And can we set up a time to do that? And I will be happy to do that. But there's no point in keep repeating points when you're not prepared to go into detail. We need to go point by point and establish the truth. And again, I think it's perfectly reasonable that you said that you don't have all the evidence. I wouldn't expect you to have it all. But until you do, until you're ready to have that discussion, it's just going to be you repeating your points and Mary repeating her points, and you
Yep.
repeating your points and Mary repeating her points, and there won't be any progress.
Yeah, I want you to make sure that you remember that it has to be a dhikr, right? He's being asked a question. If he doesn't answer it, if he does not answer it with an answer that they already know about, so they're testing him, right? Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't a trick question. It could be a trick question so that if he gives an answer, he's a false prophet because he's saying that someone who isn't a prophet is a prophet. They don't have to be honest in their question, but he is being asked a question. Hey, tell us about this guy. And so the answer has to be something they know about because they're asking him about someone they know about. So you need to show us who the evidence that the person you say that they're talking about was that they have this knowledge of the person that he's also repeating. He's repeating something they already know. So you need to bring me the source that says that Cyrus saw the sun setting and that Cyrus knew about the sun rising where people have to hide away from it, and that Cyrus built a wall to keep out Juj and Yajuj and Majuj, right? Bring me that source.
Okay, okay. So again, so from this point also, like if you say it is Alexander Great, then how come you can say from that one Quran is wrong? So that's what I don't
Okay,
get it.
excellent,
So
excellent. So let me go ahead and tell him. So what I believe happened is that the Jews wanted to trick Muhammad into revealing that he was a false prophet. So they said, tell us about the one who went all the way from the east to the west. Because what were people always saying about him? That he was just repeating tales of the ancients, right? That he wasn't a true prophet. So they're like, we're going to trick him into acting like this tale of the ancients, that this fictional story is about a prophet. So we're going to ask him about someone who isn't a prophet and who was a pagan, and we're going to trick him. Okay? So they said, tell us about the one who goes from the east to the west. And then he describes all the same events that happened in these legends and these fairy tales and these stories of the ancient, these tales of the ancient that are fiction. And he told them as if they were real and acted like Muhammad was an actual good monotheist, we'll say. It doesn't necessarily say that he is a prophet, but he's a prophet or an angel or a really good Muslim king, according to the different sources, right? But that he was a follower of God, a monotheistic God, right? So if they have tricked him into telling a story that they know is not about a monotheist and saying it's from Allah, then they have tricked him into exposing himself as a false prophet.
So if the story is wrong, from the hadith we could have understand, but there's nothing mentioned there. So they asked a question, Prophet Muhammad answered that one, then they went, right? Nothing else is mentioned there.
So here's a problem. According to the Sirah, what they said is, if he gets this right, he is a true prophet, and you should follow him. If he gets this wrong, he's a false prophet, and you should ignore him. After he gave this, and according to the Sirah, the Jews in Medina were there because they were expecting a prophet from among the Quraysh, and they were waiting for one. Okay? So they're waiting for a prophet. Now they ask him a question that's supposed to tell whether or not he's a prophet. If he had successfully answered the question and proved he was a prophet, what do you expect the people of Mecca who were wondering whether or not he's a prophet, what would you expect them to do if he succeeded?
So you're telling they should follow him? That's what you're telling?
Excellent. How many people followed him as soon as he gave this answer?
No, I had to go through the sources, but we know many
there are
Jews,
none. Nobody at that moment, nobody who had doubt before started following him. How many of those Jews who were in Medina converted to Islam at that moment? Or decided to follow him, recognized him as their prophet?
I don't know at that moment, but
zero.
As a whole, we can see. No, as a whole, we can see so many.
No, the entire lifetime of Muhammad. How many Jews? Hang on. Before Muhammad started killing Jews, if they didn't follow him, right? Before he started killing people in Medina, how many Jews followed him total?
Because in Mecca, in Mecca there was no Jews.
In Medina. Yes. So they went. So they sent a group to Medina to ask the Jews a question to test him, to find out whether or not he was a true prophet. And this is the question that the Jews in the Medina asked him. Okay. So the Jews in Medina said, ask him this question. If he gives the right answer, he's a true prophet and you should follow him. If he gives the wrong answer, he's a false prophet. Do not follow him. He gave an answer after 15 days. And guess what they did? They didn't follow him. And the Jews in Medina didn't follow him. Before he started killing a whole bunch of people in Medina, only one Jewish man and his family ever followed Muhammad. He had his whole family follow him, but it was that one Jewish man, and that's it. Nobody else followed him. Now, if you understood that he was tested before, then you would understand and you would go, hey, he failed the test. They tested him and they tricked him. And in my second, I have two streams on this topic. And in the first one, I show how he gives all the answers that are taken straight from these things that they knew before that weren't scripture. So it is a dhikr. He is giving answers from something that exists and that people recognize, but it's not scripture and they tricked him. Then in the second one, I show how the story of the slippery fish and Moses with his servant boy and this fish swims away, that story had actually already been taken from this. And that's why they ask him the story, because they recognize the story that was stolen. They're like, hey, there's this story from that's from these fairy tales of Alexander the Great, and suddenly now Moses has a fish that's coming to life, but we know it's in these stories of Alexander the Great. Let's ask him about Alexander the Great and trick him and trap him. And that's exactly what they did, and they tricked him and they trapped him. And so that's why people didn't follow him after that. That's why people didn't go, man, he isn't telling stories of the ancients. He's true. He's real. So if you could, I would really appreciate if you'd watch those 2 episodes on dhul-qarnyn. There are 2 of them, back to back. And, you know, we have discussions at the end, just like we are now, and that's like 2 hours of it. So you don't need to listen to any of the discussions. They're not even on topic, because people got really scared when they heard it and they didn't want to talk about it. It's very brave of you to come up and want to talk about this. But this is what I believe truly happened at that time, is that this is a place where Muhammad got tricked.
No, I actually forgot. First of all, let me go through the story. What happens, right? Okay, so the sources and all the things. So that's what I should do, because I cannot take
Excellent.
whatever you say. Maybe you are biased.
Yep.
Okay, that's everyone is biased, so you're biased too.
Yep.
So first I have to go through. I have to study.
That's a perfectly reasonable answer. And as it so happens, I need to wrap up now anyway, so we kind of continue the discussion either way. So
Yeah.
I
Wait.
definitely encourage you to.
Yeah. Is Zach still here? If he has a question for me, I want to answer it in like 5-10 minutes. So.
No, he didn't. He said, "Can I
dang.
come?" I added him to the stream when he first came in. He said, "Can I go up real quick?" I didn't see that message, and then he left.
Oh yeah, I just now saw it, because I just
yeah.
now
Well, I saw it.
Sorry,
it was only like 4 or 5 minutes old when I saw it, and he had already left at that point. So.
Oops.
In any case, we'll catch Zach next time. So Una said, "Oops, he forgot to say inshallah." And I told Una to repeat that comment, but she hasn't done so. Sadly, she hasn't repeated it.
That is the most excellent comment. Yep.
All right, so we're going to wrap up. I did have one more super chat from Jack Ray.
I can't answer this question in a 20-minute interview, nor is it wise to do so, which is why I never brought this topic up myself. You will not find one lecture of mine about this issue. It should never be brought up in public. And I don't like these idiots, and they are idiots, wallahi. This is not something you discuss amongst the masses, ya akhi. It's not wise. I encourage anybody who is really interested to go deep to take the class. I do this class. It'll be 1 year later.
All right, so Yasser Qadi says that he can't answer that question. I hope you saw your animation for enchilada. That was the new animation for today. Right at the end of the stream, Una figured it out. Well, she didn't actually figure it out, but she said it because it was she just wanted to actually say it. And there was a freaking typo in the command, so it didn't work the first time. So I fixed it real quick, and that's why I said, please repeat it.
Nice. That's great.
So I hope you enjoy the enchilada animation.
Yeah, I love how I left. I love how I left, and now when I came back, my camera went crazy, and now everything's off color again, and this isn't bright yellow anymore. It's excellent.
Quit mistreating them like you do me. LOL. I'm not sure who them is, or I know it's a joke, but I don't actually get the joke. So, but Una says I love it, so I'm glad you love your animation. So I'm not sure when I'll be back for sure next. I think that most likely I'll have a stream this weekend. My wedding anniversary is coming up, but I think it's probably the weekend after that we'll celebrate that. So I'll probably have a stream this weekend, but I haven't set the topic for that yet. We will be back next Tuesday, however, to continue our series with Mary, or perhaps we'll take a break from it and have a lighter topic for a week. We will see on that. And so until we meet again, remember to always say inshallah if you want your wishes to come true. See you again soon, everyone. Take this information, use it in your conversations with Muslims. Go and serve the Lord. God bless.